Brought a few friends.
No! Bex, cast them in the dungeon!
Are you thinking about me?
No, she's with us.
Oh, no! Then why didn't you come for me? 'Cause... Lloyd, are you okay?
Hey there, I'm DuckBricks, and I wanted to start off this video by saying I love Ninjago. I genuinely believe that LEGO Ninjago is one of the best children's TV shows out there, bar very, very few. It has given us 10 years of compelling stories, characters, memorable moments, incredible animation, and overall just given us a really rich and deep history and lore for a very unique fantasy-inspired universe. Ninjago is not going anywhere anytime soon. This Ninjago Crystalized season, which we are reviewing, is the finale to this era of Ninjago. Next year, there's going to be a new show. It's not going to be a reboot timeline-wise, but it'll likely be a reboot character and time frame-wise. So expect to get brand new things and maybe not see our main characters for a while other than appearing in non-canon core LEGO sets. So, why am I saying this? Well, I'm going to be completely honest. Throughout this review, I do get a little bit upset, and I do say a lot of very negative things about Ninjago Crystalized. The reason I am saying these things is not because I don't like Ninjago, it's not because I am trying to be mean, it's not because I am trying to put Ninjago down. I am saying these things because I care so much about Ninjago, and I care so much about it as a show, as a form of storytelling, as something that transcends selling products and selling LEGO. I care about its characters and its story, which is why I was very, very, very disappointed with many of the decisions made throughout the Ninjago Crystalized finale season. Now don't get me wrong, there are a lot of things to like about this, and I do have a section dedicated to what I liked. There are also a lot of other things that I honestly just didn't like, and things that aren't just stuff that I disliked or stuff that I felt could have been better. Things that genuinely make me feel that there was some character assassination going on, things that I genuinely feel teach the wrong lesson to kids and give kids the wrong takeaways who are watching these stories, things that are disrespectful to characters and to the audience and to things that have come before, and things that I genuinely feel are big, big issues that are not any result of any one person being careless or any one person kind of maliciously doing something, but just a result of people maybe being not as careful as they could have been in terms of making sure that the story that they were telling made sense and was consistent with their values and with the morals that they wanted to tell. Now, the final word I want to say here is that I definitely do not think that the right way to go about criticism is by going on Twitter and just yelling at people like Tommy A QnA or the writers and saying, you did a bad job and I didn't like this and I thought this was all awful and you are bad writers. Please don't do that. They are real people. They put a lot of love into this. And for everything bad that you may not like about a Ninjago season, a lot of them are directly responsible for the stuff that you do like about Ninjago. Of course, the good, I think certainly, looking at all of Ninjago, the good outweighs the bad. This is not in any way means to attack the creators, and really please do not go and be mean to them on Twitter or other social media. Again, they put a lot of love into Ninjago, and Tommy A QnA in particular, who is one of the people who created Ninjago, I am so grateful to you for creating such a beloved story. He recently stated in an interview that he spends more time with Ninjago than he does with his own kids, and I believe that because Ninjago is clearly a labor of love. A lot of effort goes into developing this world, and I want to say a big thank you for Tommy to doing that and everybody else involved, and I do think there's also a way to offer constructive criticism. Instead of going on Twitter and saying, I don't like you, you make bad stuff and you're a bad writer, I don't know, maybe ask questions and ask, why didn't this happen? Or why was it written to be this way? Or what was the idea behind this particular character arc? And that way, it's a lot more healthy in terms of engaging folks in a conversation about why decisions were made surrounding this piece of media. It just really sucks when I feel like this season is the biggest example of, as you can see in the title, wasted potential for LEGO Ninjago, where this season could have been the best season of Ninjago yet, and they had the groundwork set up to give our characters some of the best and most compelling arcs ever, but just didn't. And that's what's really disappointing to me. And that's really what I want to get across throughout this video. This is unscripted, this is going to be a very long video, I'm really going to be just sharing my large, free-form thoughts, open-ended, just keep on going on, and in case it's too long for you, I have put a table of contents in the description below where you can kind of jump to just stuff you want to hear, because this is going to be a long one. There isn't much else I have to say, so let's just roll the intro and Ninjago.
Alright, hey there. Thank you for tuning into DuckBricks. I'm Chris, and it's time for the LEGO Ninjago Crystalized Season Review. Now this video has been a long time coming because honestly I was kind of just in a state of shock after finally watching all of the episodes. It was a lot to process, a lot to take in, a lot of controversy surrounding the ending to this era of Ninjago, and while the show is continuing in some way, shape, or form next year in 2023, we know it's not a reboot. We also know that it probably isn't focusing on these core characters, which means that for all intents and purposes, that was the ending to Ninjago as we know it until they start something new next year. Sure, we're still going to get core sets featuring the main ninja of Kai, Jay, Zane, Cole, Lloyd, Nia, and the others, but beyond just the core sets, for the main TV storyline, it seems that we are delving into new and unfamiliar territory. And that makes Crystalized one of the most important seasons of Ninjago because it basically has wrapped up over 11 years of lore. So how did things shake up? Well, as you could tell from the intro of the video, I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm going to break this video down into a few key parts.
So to start off, I kind of want to get the elephant out of the room with this review. Yes, I am many months late to the game here, and there actually are a couple of reasons for that I feel do actually inform the point of this review. First of all, after finishing Crystalized for the first time, I kind of was left at a bit of a loss. It was very odd to me to have a final large conclusion to something that was a big part of my childhood for many years. Ninjago obviously is a big reason why I'm so into LEGO today, and I kind of grew up with Ninjago when it first started in 2011. Fond memories of watching the pilots, going down to the LEGO store and getting the Ice Dragon as my very first Ninjago set and just kind of spiraling from there. And with all its ups and downs, Ninjago has been a pretty incredible ride. Now, obviously, Ninjago is not going anywhere. LEGO has stated that Ninjago is an evergreen theme, which means that along the likes of City or Technic or whatnot, it is an original LEGO theme that will be staying basically as long as it continues to be profitable and continues to keep on running. Unlike many other original LEGO themes which typically are planned to die out after 3 years, including Ninjago Legacy, which was considered a separate theme for some reason, Ninjago's main line, on the other hand, pretty much is meant to continue basically far into the future as long as kids still want to see it. They are, however, giving us a brand new show in the summer of next year. After a couple waves of core in January, we will be getting a brand new show which presumably features new characters. I certainly hope it does, and hopefully in a brand new time period as well, where the overarching canon of the show will not be overwritten. It's not like they're going to be redoing it like a Bionicle G1 or G2 thing. They're just giving us a different chapter in the story, and that's something that I really do appreciate because I think it's high time we move on from these characters, as lovable and as good as they are, and focus on something else, and Crystalized is a really good example of why I think that would be a really good idea. So, the reason why this review is so delayed, getting back to the point, I watched it kind of all at once when it first came out on Netflix from beginning to end for the second part, and was left with a very empty feeling, and it was very strange how, at the end of the season, it did not really feel satisfying to me, and I felt that maybe I missed something, or maybe I just wasn't getting what they were going for. So what I did is I rewatched the entire season front to back, all at once, again, and then I rewatched it again for a third time. And finally, after that third rewatch, I was pretty ready to make the review, until Tommy A QnA, who's basically the creator of Ninjago, stated on Twitter that he was going to be doing a large Q&A session, where to sum up his involvement in Ninjago, he would be answering a ton of fan questions, and that would basically be it from him in terms of affecting Ninjago lore. Obviously, none of the answers he gave are strictly canon. He definitely doesn't want them to be considered canon unless it's stated in the TV show, but you could consider many of the answers to be could be canon for him, kind of like his short stories, which he will be continuing. And then of course he wanted to say a big thank you and bow out and leave Ninjago in the capable hands of a new team. So I figured, okay, you know what, I'm gonna wait until that Q&A, see if there's any interesting insights that come out. Thankfully, the Q&A was actually hosted by the TTV channel. If you aren't aware of them, they're a really big Bionicle channel. Meso and LJ and pretty much everyone else over at TTV are friends of the channel, and I've had a great time appearing on their channel once for the Bionicle Fanon contest. We've had a lot of really fun discussions, so I was really happy to see them be able to run that Q&A session, and I sent in probably like 30 or 40 questions because I had a lot of long-standing questions about Ninjago lore, specifically about Crystalized, but also about development stuff and how seasons are made and older stuff, and they asked a lot of them, so I'm really thankful for that. And because of those answers, I've been able to get a lot of new information in form for this video. And that's really how this is going to be broken down. If you haven't seen it already, in the description below I have actually put kind of a table of contents here. And this review is completely unscripted. I will basically be talking freeform. I started scripting it after I finished my third rewatch, but then I figured, you know what, I'm just going to talk freeform and go off of major bullet points. So I'm going to put my table of contents, so to speak, down in the description below, and if you want to only look at specific stuff, like if you only want me to talk about, say, some of the Harumi stuff, or Lloyd's arc, or how they handled the Crystal Council, or the whole Overlord thing, you can just jump to those specific pieces instead of listening to this entire thing, because, oh boy, this is going to be a long review. However, there are a few things I do want to get out of the way first, and the very first thing is to give a massive thank you to Tommy A QnA for, well, creating Ninjago and giving us such an amazing piece of media that so many people around the world have come to enjoy. I'm really serious about this in that Tommy has definitely made a major impact on my life and on the lives of a lot of other folks, and regardless of how you feel about Crystalized, and mind you, I will not be holding back here. I can say right now I was not a big fan of how it ended. But with the bad stuff also comes the good. Tommy is basically equally responsible for all your favorite things about Ninjago, as well as maybe some of the stuff you don't like. And again, it isn't just Tommy, there's a whole team of other people. There are many writers on these seasons and specials and shorts, and everything all has to come together with set designers and marketers and big suits and corporation stuff up at LEGO. So there's a whole lot of stuff that essentially kind of goes into making a new season of Ninjago, and Tommy isn't directly responsible for every decision. Now, because of that, I do want to thank him for coming up with this really cool idea. This is a very fun idea for a LEGO theme. Obviously, he kind of hit the nail on the head here in terms of crafting a show that is really good in terms of having a lasting impression that stays in people's minds. And since this is his final involvement with Ninjago, I do want to give a massive thank you and hope that you in the comments down below will also say thank you to Tommy. What have been your favorite stuff about Ninjago? You can share your favorite stuff about the TV show, your favorite seasons. I'd love to hear it, and I think that it's really good to be thankful for Tommy for giving us this amazing piece of media, again, regardless of how you feel about certain decisions made or how it was ended or character arcs and whatnot. That being said, I am now going to go into kind of the main review here. And before we jump in, I do want to address a couple of things that were stated in the Q&A that I personally suspected, but I never really got confirmed until I was able to, I guess, indirectly ask Tommy by tweeting out my questions and then TTV asking them kind of stuff about how Crystalized was made. So there's a few things here. First of all, they were kind of seeding in the Vengestone buyer plot ever since Season 13. They were hinting at the existence of a buyer. There was kind of some hints in Seabound as well, and everyone thought that they had a large master plan for it. And to be honest, he basically just said they didn't. They did not know who the Vengestone buyer would be when they wrote them into Season 13. They had a whole drafting board of ideas of old characters who it could be. The whole deal was, if someone's gonna be buying Vengestone, they're probably a villain, and really the only criteria there was that they had to have some amount of money, so that, I mean, I don't know, you could argue that many of the villains in Ninjago could raise a lot of money by doing villainous deeds, so they weren't really boxing themselves in by writing that in, and they just wanted a lot of Vengestone. Now, whether that was to neuter the ninja's powers or to use it for some other means, they didn't know, and they did not come up with the idea that it was actually Harumi all the way up until just very recently when Crystalized was being written. So that's kind of an interesting thing. The other thing is that in terms of the villains for the Crystal Council, it seemed like a bit of a random selection where they were kind of going through the Wildbrain villains, but also brought in Harumi and Mr. F. So what Tommy said is that specifically they actually had basically every past villain that was on the drawing board when they were trying to come up with the villains for the council. And it was not actually Tommy's idea to bring back Harumi, it was actually Braggy idea, who is one of the writers of Ninjago. He really is a big fan of Harumi's character and just wanted to bring her back. And he really pushed for it. Initially, Tommy was maybe not so convinced they should bring her back, but he was really going for it. So Tommy said, okay, sure, go for it, bring her back. We'll come up with some reason for it. I'm not sure if fault is the right word here, but it certainly wasn't his decision to actually bring back Harumi. That being said, it was Tommy's decision to use Inner Steel in the finale, whereas Braggy wanted to do the overture, so I guess you'll win some, you'll lose some. Some other interesting production points during the development of Crystalized was that pretty much these sets were designed first. So they came up with a lot of these sets first and basically came to Tommy and said, hey, you need to have a golden four-headed dragon in the season somewhere. You need to have some sort of ninja vehicles somewhere, and those were basically the first ones designed, and the villains came later. So obviously you take the Golden Dragon and immediately put the focus on Lloyd, again because it's the final season. That was kind of their chain of thought. In terms of the buyer, Bragi actually came up with 5 different ideas for the Vengestone buyer. Harumi was just one of them, and to quote Tommy, they went through everyone. The original idea that Tommy had was that Pythor was actually going to be the one lurking in the shadows, and he was actually present in every single season since he was last appearing in, but was just invisible, because they figured, well, Pythor's main skill is that he can turn invisible. Maybe he was lurking there the whole time, and he was actually either the buyer or he was just one of the mysterious villains who's been tracking the ninja and has been in the background of every season. So they took that idea, but then kind of changed it around and used it on Harumi instead, to kind of just put her in disguise or hidden in the events of Seabound and Master of the Mountain. The other note that he had to say about how they brought back Harumi is that he specifically stated that by interacting with fans over the years, they've been very aware of how polarizing Harumi is. Some love her, some don't. Online, Tommy has pretty much always been adamant that she is dead, but Bragi again was the one who came up with the idea that she was still alive, and she was maybe brought back by the Overlord, who somehow has this power, and they're just like, yeah, whatever, the Overlord just has this power, it's fantasy, don't question it, which is the reasoning behind a lot of stuff that happens in Ninjago, and honestly, it doesn't really bother me as much as I know it bothers a lot of other people. Things can exist in a fantasy world and not necessarily need explanations, and I was totally okay with the Overlord having the power to bring back Harumi. The more questionable things came with, well, what they did with her character after she was brought back. The way that she was brought back didn't really matter to me, and I was totally fine with it. And I'll talk about that a lot more when we actually get to my review, because this section is still talking about kind of the recap of Tommy's Q&A. Now this leads us to a pretty interesting discussion on how the season actually ended. Tommy specifically said that there was a big back and forth discussion or even argument in the writer's room in terms of how do we conclude the story. There were a lot of writers who wanted it to have a conclusive ending, other writers did not want it to have a conclusive ending, and the final decision was that the idea behind the season and the idea behind how the season ended is that it should be left up for interpretation, and it should be left up for people to decide. Similar to stuff like the Ninja's Ages. Is Harumi redeemed? Is she not redeemed? I don't know. You decide. That was the mentality that was used throughout a lot of the endings for crafting the Crystalized finale. Now, in Tommy's mind, he said that personally for him, her actions do not redeem her, she is basically an irredeemable character, but he also felt it was more important to leave it up to the individual watcher, which to some extent, I understand. I get the mentality that, hey, you want people to get their own takeaways from the show. Sometimes having an ambiguous ending can be really good, if done right. The problem, I think, with this is that there were just too many open threads, and the endings were just a little bit too ambiguous. You don't really know the ending fates of a lot of things, you don't know why certain things happened, you don't know what was going through the heads of certain characters, and apparently that was by design, because they didn't want to actually tell a story themselves, they wanted you to come up with how you thought the story should end. And I think that can work for some cases. There are certainly things that absolutely works well for. I just think they use that trick in terms of letting the audience decide what happens maybe one too many times during this finale, and especially during this entire season, where maybe if they made one person's fate more conclusive, or did one other thing that was a little bit more clear in terms of a direction for the story, I would have been a little bit more forgiving on it. But as he was saying, Tommy said basically the idea behind the ending of the season was to leave it up to the individual, and yeah, I can tell. I can certainly tell that a lot of the things here were left for interpretation and did not have proper conclusions, but again, we will get to that in the review. The one thing I find especially funny is that LEGO Ideas is actually holding a competition right now where you can decide, or not really a competition, it's kind of more of a project or some sort of type of thing like that, but it's where you can decide how Ninjago Crystalized ended. And it is on the Ideas site. You basically can submit a comic or a story or something like that, and it's like, yeah, we don't know how Crystalized ended, but maybe you do, so you can tell us. Which I think is very, very funny to me. I think it's kind of hilarious that LEGO themselves, let me quote the actual message on the Ideas platform, because I actually personally found this really funny. The direct quote is, what happens next? The end of season 15 of Ninjago leaves a lot of questions. Could you use your imagination to tell us what's next for Ninjago? And yes, it leaves a lot of questions. Oh man, and really that was basically the idea behind the entire season, and I think it's pretty obvious. I respect, I guess, that they decided to go in that direction to purposefully leave a lot of questions open. I'm glad it wasn't like by accident. Like, they knew what they were doing by not giving us answers to a lot of things, and it was on purpose. But I don't know. I feel like they probably should have just addressed one thing. Now, moving onwards to kind of wrap up the Q&A here, and there's a lot more stuff in the Q&A. I actually took a ton of detailed notes while the Q&A was going on, so I've linked those in a Google Doc in the description below if you want to read through them. Lots of really interesting stuff, like how the original story of the Overlord is that he's actually the evil version of the first Ninjitsu Master, and the entire fight with the Stone Army and whatnot was the first Ninjitsu Master trying to bottle his Oni side of himself into stone vessels to prevent his evil from spreading. There's a whole lot of crazy lore stuff that he revealed or had kind of ideas on in this Q&A. So if you want to read more about that, do check out the Google Doc. I have linked it below. But again, we want to focus just on Crystalized. And one of my questions was, what are things that you would change about Crystalized, or something that you wanted to include but couldn't? And Tommy actually had two things. The one thing, which is one that I really wanted to happen and was very excited for when the episode titles were first leaked, was he wanted to do a Zane's PTSD story about his turn as the Ice Emperor in Season 11. So essentially, he, obviously, in case you aren't aware, Zane was trapped for decades in the Neverrealm and was essentially brainwashed into being one of the main villains for the Ninjago story. And over his time as the Ice Emperor, he did a lot of awful stuff. He did a lot more worse stuff than a lot of other Ninjago villains. He actually wiped out one of the species of Yetis. He subjugated all of the people in the villages of ice. Pretty bad guy. And after that, he basically faced zero consequences or repercussions for his actions. Now, granted, he was kind of brainwashed, but he was still aware of everything that was going on. He was conscious near the end what he had done, but they never really addressed it, because after all, in the final episode of Season 11, and this is going to sound really familiar, they essentially rushed him getting his memories back and had to speedrun the ninja getting back to Ninjago, so they didn't have any time to focus on Zane's character whatsoever. As soon as he realized that what he was doing was wrong, he snapped out of it, and that was it. We never got it mentioned ever again, until Crystalized. So early on, we got a list of leaked episodes, and one of the episodes was Return of the Ice Emperor. And we were all thinking, oh wow, this is going to be really interesting, because we've never addressed this for years now, and it's been a really big point of Zane's character that a lot of people bring up, wondering when are we actually going to address how he feels about that, and how it's affected him as a person. And Tommy has been trying to make this happen, but unfortunately, essentially what had happened is that Tommy pitched this idea a few times, and he was trying to convince the writers to do this. But the writers felt that since they're making a kids show, this was too serious, and if they really wanted to address it, they wanted to do a goofy version of it, because the placement in the season was at a pretty dark spot. The Overlord was pretty much destroying all of Ninjago, and they figured, why not make an episode for a little bit of comic relief and do it based on that. And don't get me wrong, I am all for funny episodes. I think Ninjago humor is really good, surprisingly, for a kids show. It's actually some of the best, and I really do enjoy a lot of their funny one-off episodes. But this was not the topic to make a funny one-off episode for, especially with so many fans, and I know it wasn't just me, so many fans asking, hey, when are we actually going to get this addressed in the future? So clearly Tommy actually did have the right idea here. He wanted to make it happen, but again, he stated again he is the producer of Ninjago, he is not a writer. And he will never force a writer to do something they don't want to do. So he brought his idea to the writers, they basically said, no, we'll do it the funny way if you really want to do it, and he said, fine, just do that. So the general consensus in the writers' room was that more fun was needed, hence why this didn't happen, which is a shame. And we'll talk a lot about this more when we discuss Zane's character arc later on, and actually the character arcs for all the ninja, but suffice to say that, yeah, I really think this could have been a very good idea. The second thing that I do want to mention that Tommy actually wanted to change was that the Oni form for Lloyd, he really loved the idea about Garmadon pushing Lloyd into an Oni, and he actually wanted to draw out the scene where Lloyd was in Oni form, and wanted him to be able to use it for a lot longer, maybe even like a minute and a half, until seeing his reflection, but they kind of had to balance their chips between either putting more emphasis on the dragon or the Oni form. And essentially how he described it is that they come up with an overarching master plan for the season and chop up bits at a time. And there's very few instances where they can go back and cut stuff because, quote unquote, the train has left the station, which implies that they do not actually lock what happens in each episode until some of the early episodes are already done. The question here was that, well, if you wanted to spend more time with Lloyd in its Oni form, why don't you cut anything in the previous stuff and maybe push some stuff back and give us 2 episodes for the finale? But then he was like, no, you can't do that because those episodes are already done, which is very odd to me because it suggests that they started production on early episodes without actually having the ending finalized or in mind, which is very, very strange. The alternative idea that he had was if they were not going to bring Nia back, the potential ending for the season was that Lloyd was going to destroy the Overlord and completely decimate him after Garmadon is actually killed, or maybe even seemingly killed, it doesn't matter. Lloyd is so angry that he's lost in his Oni form, and then he takes the Overlord's throne. And this is really interesting because we actually see this in the sets themselves of Lloyd in his Oni form sitting on the Overlord's throne. The realm starts to fall apart, the balance is completely torn up, and then Nia comes out of the ocean in her water dragon form, and they have a massive fight. It's Nia versus Lloyd, and it's up to the rest of the ninja to fight Lloyd and bring him back, and then they have basically the same ending, where they bring Lloyd back from being evil. He realizes that he was going too much into the darkness within himself, which is something he was struggling with the entire season, kind of goes back on it, and that's the ending. And of course there were scenarios where Garmadon did actually die, but they decided to just make things quote-unquote nice and tidy and not actually kill off any of the characters. Now, I realize that this is always kind of the pitfall of a creator going on a podcast and saying, yeah, this is an idea that we had, or we could have done this, because that sounds like a much, much more interesting and better ending and character arc than we actually got. I don't know, I think that would have been a really cool way to have Lloyd's character arc done, but you know, they decided to go in a different direction. That was just one idea. The other idea was that initially, the designers in Billund said that Nia had to come back. LEGO themselves basically mandated or basically told Tommy that, yeah, we're bringing Nia back in the sets, come up with some way to bring her back. So he was like, okay, let me think. So the original pitch was that Nia was out to sea but had kind of forgotten who she was and transformed into this force of nature, which generated a big Spinjitzu vortex in the middle of the ocean that was drawing the Ninjago Island and the Dark Island back together. So the 2 temples of darkness and light were coming back together, and dark matter was starting to flood from the Dark Island over to Ninjago. So that was one idea, and they were like, okay, they have to bring Nia back from there, but then they wanted to actually give Nia the agency to bring herself back, which I do think was a good idea. It was pretty much the only character arc she had in the season before becoming an action figure, but we'll talk about that when we talk about her. But they wanted to give her agency, so I said, okay, that's fine. And they said, okay, well, maybe there's some villain who is gathering Vengestone to dump it into the sea, and by having so much of it in the sea, it messes with Nia's mind and it corrupts her. That was one idea they had. So again, they already knew what some of the toys were going to be, but they had to fit some logic to the toys. And overall, he stated that the Crystalized is based on the structure of Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Tommy Anderson is a big fan of Star Wars, and he basically mirrored Crystalized after that movie, where you kind of have almost like a side mission to rescue or quote-unquote save one of the main characters for the first half of it, and then that was kind of building up to more conflict in the second half, where you have this kind of throne battle where you've got a villain who's turned to the light, and one final showdown between the ultimate evil. Thing is, Return of the Jedi is not a very well-paced movie, at least in my opinion, and I know this might give me some flack from Star Wars fans. I always thought that was maybe the worst of the original trilogy. That might not be a hot take. I think that actually is most people's takes, but I do think there are a lot of improvements that could be made to the structure of Return of the Jedi, and a lot of the problems that that movie has are very, very evident in Crystalized. So yeah, after this interview, things have become a lot clearer in terms of why the season ended up the way it did, why certain things work out, and so on. So that was quite interesting to hear. But overall, that really kind of sums up most of the Crystalized specific stuff for the interview. There's a lot of other stuff that he talked about, like they talked about really considering bringing back Nauticon for the Crystal Council until they realized that it was too much effort to explain to the viewers what happened in Skybound and who he was, why he was back, why the other characters don't remember him. So they said, you know what, let's not do that, that's too complicated. And honestly, given how they treated the rest of the generals, I'm pretty happy they didn't bring Nauticon back, because that's a really tricky one to handle in terms of a season. He's very, very powerful, and you have to use him really well. and they didn't really use the rest of the generals at all after the first couple episodes they were in, so I personally am glad they didn't bring back such a big character like Notakon, because I feel like that would have been more detrimental to his own arc. Overall though, a lot of interesting production details. Obviously, he did state that there were some, I wouldn't say budget issues, but there were some budget reasons behind certain things didn't appear, much as the final battle that brought back most of the older characters. At the end of the final few episodes, they just simply couldn't bring back the Elemental Masters because it's just really expensive to put in particle effects and to make new models for the Masters because it's a new animation studio. That made more sense to me. It's disappointing to not see the Elemental Masters, but I understand it from a budget standpoint. That also is why they don't talk, because as soon as there is a voice actor with a spoken line, their budget goes way up, and if you're gonna have a voice actor come in to just say one line, it's not very budget effective. So they just simply didn't have the money, I guess, to do that, which is disappointing, but not entirely unsurprising. Now, they did have the money to bring back Morrow and Garmadon's voice actors for one line in Hands of Time, but you know what, let's not talk about Hands of Time when it comes to budget, because that had some issues of its own. But honestly, with that, we have summed up, and I realize this has already been going on for quite a long time, we've summed up all of the detailed parts from the Ninjago Q&A that Tommy did surrounding Crystalized. And there's a lot of really interesting points here that definitely makes things make more sense. It does also confuse me to an extent as to why these decisions were made, but it definitely makes more sense as to why certain things happened. And the final message he had was that the goal of Crystalized was to get to a point where everything is back to a quote-unquote healthy status quo. If this was the last time these characters ever were to appear, it would be a good ending, and they would be ready for future adventures. So basically going into it, they're like, no one should die, nothing drastic should happen, they wanted to get it back to status quo. Which is a big problem that Ninjago has. They are very afraid of progressing the story, and they really don't want to change characters or have them go through big transformations, because they want to bring everything back to the status quo in case they need to do some sort of reboot or a soft reboot or retelling sometime in the future. They want to keep their options open, which to an extent I understand. To the other extent, come on. I think that there's a certain point when you're making children's media where things have to change. People appreciate character arcs, people appreciate characters growing and changing. And I think that brings us in to our main review. So now that we've summed up Tommy's Q&A, let's talk a little bit about the overall viewing of Crystalized, and yeah, I've got a lot of stuff that I want to say here. So first of all, I figured I would break this review up into multiple different points. What was good, what was bad, kind of go briefly episode by episode and talk about what I thought about was good and bad for each episode, talk about some of the constraints, talk about some of the weird inconsistencies in the season, do some stuff about the soundtrack, which I had some thoughts on, and then go into the character arcs. So I want to talk about Lloyd's arc, Harumi's arc, the Crystal Council's usage, and the ninja character arcs, as well as the overall Overlord bringing back in the Balance arc. So those are all going to be different points in this video, and again, this is going to be a long one, so if you do want to check down below, you can jump to the table of contents. Now, at the final end of the video, I have some ideas for how maybe they could have done things a little bit differently, and I definitely don't want to say that these should have definitely been what they should have done. I am by no means a professional TV writer. I don't write children's shows. I don't produce children's shows. Tommy and Braggy and everyone working on Ninjago definitely know a lot more than me about how to actually make entertaining children's media. And I definitely am not saying that they should have done these. I'm just saying, okay, well, if I was rewriting the show, here's the things I would have changed. And I'm kind of grouping these into three different categories. The first one is very, very minor rewrites, and I'm specifically talking about the final 2 episodes. If we kept literally the rest of the season the same, and I had to change a couple of things in the final 2 episodes, what would I have done? The second kind of grouping here is rewrites within constraints, and we've talked a little bit about constraints, which thankfully were cleared up a lot by the Tommy interviews. We know that LEGO wanted Nia to come back, so she has to come back in human form. Let's also consider that every single one of these sets has to actually feature in the season, because that's another constraint. One of the first things they knew about going into the season is that you gotta feature a big 4-headed golden dragon, so you gotta have that. Now, let's say Braggy or a writer or something really wanted to bring Harumi back. I would say that's a constraint of sorts. How are we going to write this such that it makes sense for her to be brought back? And then finally, let's say you want to bring back the Overlord and you want to bring back old villains. how are we going to handle that? So those are kind of the second grouping of rewrites where you get to mess around with stuff in the whole season, but they're within constraints. And the final grouping that I kind of wanted to give some big, broad ideas are big rewrites. Stuff like, okay, let's throw out constraints, go into fantasy world here, we've got infinite budget, we don't have to care about sets, what would this finale be? And what would it be like, given that the same general idea is going to happen, where it's like, okay, the Overlord comes back, you focus on Lloyd, and sure, throw the Golden Dragon in, I don't really care. You can fit that in pretty much any scenario. What are the big rewrites that I would have done to maybe make this feel like a more satisfying conclusion? And with that said, now that the table of contents has been laid out, I think it's now time we jump into the main review. So first of all, I do want to start off with the good stuff. And with every WildBrain season, there is a lot of really good stuff here, and I'm going to try to focus the section on mostly talking about the positives. I will talk a little bit about some counterpoints that maybe can be seen as negatives, but in light of positives. So I do want to start off with the good stuff. If you don't want to hear me talk about the good stuff, just skip to the timestamp in the description to hear me talk about the bad stuff, because that will probably be funnier and I'll be complaining a lot more. Here I'm actually talking about the stuff I liked, so if you want to listen, thank you for being here, let's hear it. So stuff that I liked. Obviously, the animation is spectacular. This is a pretty controversial opinion, I do understand, but I am of the opinion that WildBrain, or this modern era of Ninjago, 2019 onwards, has been the absolute peak of Ninjago animation. I wasn't so sure after they kind of downgraded the environments from the Will Film era, especially in seasons 8 to 10. The city looked amazing, the environments and backgrounds looked really good, but the fights and the movement of characters were just not at the quality that they're at today. And for the most part, this season delivered on excellent animation. We had what is probably one of the best Ninjago fights ever, midway through the second half of the season and not in the final episode, for some reason, and we'll get to that. But it was still one of the best fights ever between Wu and the Overlord. That was a really good one. I think it was super creative in the way they used the characters' powers and their movesets and swords and armors and crystals. Very cool how they did that. So I'm a big fan of that fight, and overall the animation is just really stunning, even better than usual for this particular season. Everything was rendered with care. You can see the scratches on the ninjas' outfits. They all have different texturing to their arms. When they assumed dragon form, that was a magical moment and was absolutely spectacular just how good they look, kind of radiant and glowing against the purple lighting. WildBrain has been and is continuing to do an incredible job on LEGO Ninjago, transitioning it from what was once a kind of clunky CGI 3D animated show in 2011 with some very wacky fights and not a lot of motion to it, to something that really feels eye-catching, engaging, and really exciting to watch. And that is absolutely one of the best things about the season. The other thing I really liked about the season that is honestly a bit of a double-edged sword is the soundtrack, because, as usual, the soundtrack is the best part of every Ninjago season. Even the worst Ninjago season, Hands of Time, has probably one of its best soundtracks ever. And no matter the quality of the season's writing, you can guarantee that the soundtrack is going to be really good. Now, when composing the season, the composers actually stated that this was a dream come true to them, and it was the perfect season for them to do, presumably because they got to bring back so many motifs and so many old themes and callbacks to older parts of Ninjago lore. And that was something that was really exciting. It was cool to hear Harumi's themes again. It was cool to hear some semblance of Pythor's themes from season 1 with the violin. That was a really cool callback. We got a really interesting rendition of the Overlord theme combined with the Oni theme, and same for the March of the Oni themes. We got them for Lloyd mixed in with a dark version of the Green Ninja theme. All sorts of really cool reimaginings of older Ninjago tracks. The unfortunate thing is, I can't really even think of a single notable track here that stood out as new for the season. If you go back in time and look at, say, Seabound, that had a really good and memorable motif for Wojira. You had something that is immediately when it plays, you know it has something to do with Wojira. On the island, you had these interesting tribal drums. Season 13 gave us the best theme yet for Cole and gave us a really interesting theme for when he achieves his Spinjitzu burst, probably one of the best pieces of music composed for Ninjago. Prime Empire had an amazing Gaining Sentience theme where the AI gained sentience, and so on. You got an amazing Ice Emperor theme. Season 11 probably had some of the best themes in terms of having a whole theme dedicated to the Formlings and Akita, and of course the Ice Emperor being a darker version of Zane's theme. And then you get to this season where I don't really think there was actually any new themes, and do correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, obviously there were new tracks. There was a track that was specifically made. I think the only new one wasn't really a stand-up, but there was one for the Crystal Spiders, and it was just okay, to be honest. It was alright. I mean, I think it was very fitting for the Crystal Spiders being these small, kind of diminutive menaces and adversaries for the ninja. That was a new theme. But everything else kind of was just reused, and they really kind of went to the point where they were just using older tracks from older episodes and not even actually putting new spins on it. For instance, there's a big turning point in Harumi's character arc when she decides to switch sides and fight back against the Overlord, and they just reused the music that they played initially in Season 12 when she was fighting against Lloyd in Prime Empire, and they didn't really change it up whatsoever. We got a few new instrumentations, or orchestrations, like the newer version of a Harumi theme that was a little bit more serious and had a lot more emotion to it, kind of around the early episodes where she appeared in, and there was one final track that played when the ninja assumed dragon form and when Lloyd's golden dragon was fighting the Overlord, but for the most part, there were not a lot of memorable new themes, and that was a little bit disappointing. And I'm very curious to hearing the actual soundtrack when it is released. They promised it would be released around the same time as the season, but they are now later than me in publishing it in terms of me publishing this review. But yeah, we were supposed to get a new soundtrack that was released with the season. I don't know why we haven't gotten it yet. I'm very curious to hear it because while I do love the callbacks, and I think the soundtrack is phenomenal as always, it was a little disappointing not hearing more of that. Moving on from these soundtracks though, I think I really liked the first half of the season, honestly, a lot more than the second half, and I initially did not think I was going to be saying this. But the first half actually told a really concrete story in what could be seen as arcs. The first 6 episodes are all focused on bringing back Nya, no matter the cost, and they actually had some really interesting character points in that, which I thought were setting up individual arcs for the ninja, which ultimately didn't really get followed up on. Zane turning off his emotions is a really interesting concept, and obviously, I really thought, I was like, oh my goodness, they're gonna call back to the Ice Emperor, because of course, the Ice Emperor is the representation of Zane without emotions. All the way back in Season 11, they set up the greatest fears of all the ninja, and this is where I thought the season was going. They showed Lloyd's greatest fear as becoming his father, and he spends the entire season trying to overcome his Oni side and realize how to accept the Oni side within him. And the conclusion of that was, well, not very good, and we'll talk about that when we get to Lloyd's arc. But that was initially what I thought they were setting up. You have Nya's greatest fear of being normal. Not having her powers, not being a ninja. I was like, okay, wonderful. They're gonna bring her back, and she's gonna have to grapple with this as her greatest fear of being normal. You had Zane's greatest fear of losing his emotions, and what he would be without his emotions. And you start off the season with him having turned off his emotions because he is too overwhelmed with grief by Nya. That is such an interesting way to start the season and make our heroes actually grapple with concepts that are very painful for them and something that they really have to look inwards and grow as characters. And it's just a shame that they didn't actually do anything about that, but it was a really good setup. The setup for the first few episodes of the season, having this be the main idea and driving force behind their character arcs, was really strong. I also thought they were able to use some of the past villains in really inventive ways. Most of the first 6 episodes were focused around bringing back Asphira, who was the villain of Season 11, to drain Nya's powers, and to essentially make her normal so she would come back to human form and remember who she is. Asphira's character in this was greatly improved from Season 11. A lot of people kind of just saw her as a joke villain in the first half of Season 11, except the problem was the writers weren't really in on the joke. She was built up as a very powerful threat, kept on yelling revenge and seeking revenge against Wu, and they never really leaned into that being funny. I think it was, I don't know, they probably just didn't realize that that was funny until it actually came out, but there were so many memes about how she's the revenge noodle and just yelling revenge is her only dialogue, and they really leaned into that here, and there's a really funny bit in the episodes where they actually have to work with Asphira, and they bring her back to Wu, and they have a bit of a competition where they kind of compete in different feats, and Asphira keeps on cheating to prove that she's better than Wu, and I thought that was really funny, and it really made her character so much more entertaining. After looking at the lineup of the villains returning, Asphira was the one I was least excited for because she was kind of a nothing villain and was one of the most bland villains in Season 11, and they completely turned that around in Season 15. They gave her a second chance, and she became easily one of my favorite Ninjago villains after just these 6 episodes, which is a pretty big feat. I really do love seeing her now, and just hearing the way that she speaks is just really funny to me after these episodes, and they really gave her a quite interesting character. And I really do like how they ended it, because they specifically ended it with Lloyd keeping his word. He initially promises to Asphira that if she helps them free Nia and save her, he would let her go. And she doesn't believe him, and she's like, yeah, I don't think so, but they essentially force her to, so she's like, whatever, I'll do it anyway. They're boxed in, the new ninja are coming to arrest them, and Lloyd's like, yeah, I'm gonna keep my word, I'm a good person, I'm going to let you go, here's this secret escape exit from the monastery that you can get out. And Asphira's kind of taken aback, and she's like, oh, will wonders ever cease? Are you really going to do this? And she leaves, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because that is setting her up for a pretty interesting character arc in the future, where she realizes that her enemies do have honor. She has been kind of very fixated on revenge because she has perceived that she has been wronged by Wu. But then maybe they were setting up something in the future for her to maybe have a change of heart or turn against the Overlord. And I initially thought that maybe the end of the season would be all of these villains in the council eventually turning against the Overlord after they realize kind of what his main plan is. Unfortunately, they didn't do anything with that. But the first 6 episodes had a really good setup for them to do something with that. The next 6 episodes were not quite as good as the first 6, because I think the biggest complaint was that they brought back Nia and she didn't really do anything. And again, we'll talk about this more when we get to Nia's character arc. But this was focused around the ninja being essentially thrown in jail, and it was kind of a redo of the Skybound arc, except this time it did kind of feel like it had a lot more consequences than the Skybound prison arc. Kind of halfway through the season with Skybound, they just realized that the ninja were framed, and they were like, okay, whatever, we're on your side now, and they kind of just got rid of the whole prison arc and the ninja being public enemies arc. This lasted throughout the entire season, and the repercussions of the ninja choosing to commit a crime to save somebody that they cared about was something that was really interesting, because it shows the ninja were willing to not obey the law and to specifically break the law and even harm some innocent people just to get back people that they care about. And that was a really interesting way to treat their characters, and I was really interested to see where the prison arc was going. It was very funny seeing Pythor back. Pythor is a fan favorite character, and seeing him back in the prison was wonderful. Really like Pythor being back in the season, wish he was used more, but that was really fun. And it was also cool to see them just interact with the other villains and go through their own different stages of acceptance of Nia returning. The Benefit of Grief, which is an episode that a lot of people give a lot of flack to, is one I actually did really like. I do unironically kind of like Sally's song, Inner Steel. I listened to it quite a lot when the episode came out and when it was first released. Don't at me. I kind of think it's a good song. I don't think it should have been used for the final episode, but I do think it's a pretty good, high-quality song. It's got a good message to it, and I think it was a fairly okay way to resolve Zane's whole arc in terms of turning off his emotions. Could have focused on it a little bit more, but it was alright. And then the final episodes of this arc got everybody, including me, so excited for what was to come. The Council of the Crystal King, which finally reunited all of the villains, revealed that Harumi was alive and behind everything. That was so exciting for everyone, even though we all knew Harumi was going to be back because of the sets. It was just so cool to see these villains interact, to see Pythor and Asphira kind of be snarky towards each other, to see how they were actually speaking and interacting, all these villains from previous seasons. And there was so much excitement going into Crystalized after this episode. It felt that the second half of the season could do no wrong. If this had been as good as it was, sure, there were a lot of episodes that felt, I wouldn't say fillery, but they certainly felt like they were kind of wasting some time in terms of giving us fun stuff, but we had a lot of episodes to go, and we were like, you know what, this isn't even half of the season, it's less than the first half, this is a really exciting point, and that was probably one of my favorite things about the whole hype around Crystalized. I remember I was actually in Legoland Billund at the time in the Billund airport when these episodes dropped. I dropped what I was doing. I didn't even go to the Lego house or the Lego museum. I was like, you know, I'm watching these right now, and it was such an exciting time to be a Ninjago fan, to interact with everybody. And this is just one of my favorite memories about watching Crystalized live, was because everyone was so excited about where it would go after this. Unfortunately, after that, I have not a lot of good things to say about the second half, and I feel kind of bad about that. I wish I did. This is tough, because regardless of what Ninjago is giving us, it's still entertaining. And I will say, this is by no means the worst season. The worst season is Hands of Time, because Hands of Time's worst crime is that it is not entertaining. It is a pain to get through, and it is not fun to watch. Each of these episodes on their own were very fun to watch, and I think that's probably the nicest thing I could say about them. The action was very good, the dialogue was engaging, the acting was amazing this season. Lloyd's voice actor was really going off, Harumi's voice actress was doing an incredible job. The voice acting was on point this season. Everyone was doing really good. Andrew Francis came in after the tragedy of losing Cole's original voice actor, Kirby Morrow, and made the role his own, but really kind of just blended right into the cast, right to the point where when I was done watching the first few episodes, I completely forgot Cole was being voiced by someone different. He just did that good of a job. The voice acting was really good, and honestly, those are probably the best things I can say about these episodes. They had some good moments. Ronin's mini character arc throughout the season and throughout, I guess, the past couple of seasons where he was initially a criminal but then kind of had a change of heart and sided with the ninja is a retread of his entire arc in, well, every season he appears in. But it was okay. I mean, if you're gonna reintroduce him for the Wildbrain era, it made sense. It was cool seeing all the villains back, and it was very, very exciting seeing a lot of the allies return for the final fight. Sure, sans the Elemental Masters and missing a lot of very important characters, but okay, working within the budgets, very cool to see them return. And I do think that the final endings with Garmadon and the way it was ended with Garmadon planting the fern and saying that it kind of has its own roots and treating it as Lloyd and an allegory for Lloyd and his own son, that was good. I think the whole Garmadon arc was actually pretty good this season. I think that's it. I honestly think that's probably all the good things I have to say about the season, and I wish there was more to say. And I realize that I've talked about great things and good things about the season for 15 minutes now, so I'm sure that we're going to talk for a lot more about the bad stuff. But yeah, a lot of good for the season. It's not one of the worst seasons. I wouldn't even make it second worst. I think there are a lot worse things about some of the other seasons. It's still a very solid season. It's the longest we've gotten. More Ninjago's always good. It just... There's a lot of stuff that I want to get into now about stuff that I felt was maybe not even bad. Could have been done better, is what I would say. So with the good stuff out of the way, let's get to the bad stuff. Oh boy, so this is going to be an interesting section. For the stuff that I felt could have been improved, let's say, about the season, there are a few major groupings. There's some stuff related to constraints, there's some inconsistency stuff, there's some stuff about the soundtrack, but I already kind of talked about that, how I felt like they could have made some new themes. And there's a whole lot of stuff that I really want to talk about in terms of the arcs and pacing of the season. Those are the big ones, the character arcs and the pacing. So we'll get some of the initial stuff out of the way. I personally think it was a mistake to bring Nia back, especially so soon after Seabound. Yes, it was very unfortunate for them to essentially quote-unquote kill off the main female character of the series. That was something that I definitely feel was a decision made because maybe her sets weren't selling very well, but then again, they made the largest Crystalized set based on her, so maybe not. I still think it was a mistake because it removes a lot of the consequences that came in after Season 14 Seabound. Season 14 is probably one of my favorite Ninjago seasons. Sure, it's not perfect, but the ending was just so good. Essentially, it had a 4-part season finale, and that really gave it a lot of time to breathe and make the sacrifice feel earned. And it really felt like this was going to have lasting repercussions on the characters. We were going to see how Kai was going to be dealing with the loss of his sister. We would see how Jay reacted. We would see how all the other ninja picked up after the loss of one of their own. And yes, we have seen that before in Tournament of Elements after Zane himself seemingly died, but that was only basically around for one episode until it was confirmed to them that Zane was alive and then they jumped right into the tournament. Here, we were going to spend an potentially entire season grappling with the potential of the ninja dealing with how they would actually react to one of their own just simply not being around anymore. And whether or not she was still alive or existing in some form, they would not have the Nia that they had known to grow and love back again. And that was such an interesting concept from Seabound. I was beyond excited to see where they were going with that in this season. And then they bring her back, and the way they brought her back was honestly not one of the worst things about the season. Again, I love how they gave her agency. I think it was really cool to have her be the one to come to the realization herself that, hey, I shouldn't be here. This is wrong. I don't want to be stuck in this form forever. I need to get back to my friends and help them. I think that was a really good idea. I also think that could have happened either much later in the season, or they could have saved Nia as kind of a final battle type conflict, where maybe if they had the last 4 episodes being a final battle, it would have been really cool to see Nia kind of return in her water form, which was something that they conceptualized. It was something they did consider, having her return at the final moment to help out the heroes, but still keeping these sacrifices of Seabound intact and forcing the characters to grapple with the loss of a friend throughout the entire season. Bringing her back so soon, I think, was definitely a mistake, especially right after Seabound. If they even waited one season, if they had one season in between Seabound and Crystalized, I think that would have been a lot better, and would have at least given us a whole season of the ninja grappling with her loss. But doing it literally 2 episodes, if you were to binge Ninjago, she turns into the ocean in episode 180, and she is back in episode 182. There's 2 episodes, not 1 episode passes, or I guess literally 1 episode passes where she is gone. That takes a lot away from the stakes of Seabound to me, and essentially makes a lot of what happened in Seabound and the whole build up to her sacrifice feel kind of pointless, because they essentially just erase that really powerful, strong decision they made to propel the story forwards. We've always known for a long time that Ninjago is never going to do stuff like, say, LEGO would do in Bionicle's early days, where you would have concrete character sacrifices, people would die and never come back, and that would be a very concrete thing, and you would have real consequences, because they always want to maintain the status quo. And I had grown to accept that over time. I had grown to accept it for what it is, and still enjoy Ninjago for the stuff that it did give us. However, I really do think this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that LEGO themselves could have made, which was just bringing her back so early. And there's not a lot more I can say about it until going into Nia's arc herself, which again will be a completely different section of this video, because I have so much to say about that. But then moving on to the rest of the stuff in terms of constraints. The other constraint that we kind of wrote out here was that we specifically knew that we had to bring Harumi back. Now, bringing Harumi back is not a bad idea in concept. I think there could have been a lot of very interesting things done by bringing Harumi back. The way it was done, though, was just really not great, and I think this is one of the more core issues of the way that Crystalized was made as a whole. You see, in the writer's room, there were, I believe, over 5 or 6 different writers, each working on Crystalized. This did not have a singular vision. Writers would change from episode to episode, and as Tommy stated in his interview, writers disagreed on how they wanted to treat Harumi. Certain writers wanted her to have a more sympathetic story. Other writers wanted to play into her being a whole-on villain, and they could not agree on how they wanted to tell the story, which is why going from one episode to another, things feel incredibly jarring, and that is most obvious when we go to the episodes with Return to Primeval's Eye and The Coming of the King. In the end of The Coming of the King, we kind of see Lloyd and Harumi have a heart-to-heart, so to speak, where she purposefully throws the other villains off his scent to be able to speak to him one-on-one. The Overlord asks Harumi to kill him, and she asks the other villains to basically get rid of Lloyd. And Harumi just says no, and she doesn't want to do that. And that was a really interesting thing because it showed that she had some humanity to her. She didn't want to condemn Lloyd to a dark fate because she really was convinced that she could bring him over to their side and she could convince him that what they were doing was right. But then you have some issues as to why on earth does Harumi think that Lloyd would be convinced by this? And secondly, and more importantly, why is Harumi convinced by the Overlord's plan? And we'll talk a lot more about that when we get to her arc, but that was one of the biggest complaints about it, because when you go from that episode, literally the next episode, she is a conniving villain, and she's making jokes, and she is laughing about how Lloyd is in plight, and kind of playing around with him, kind of like she was doing back in the certain scenes in Game of Masks back in Season 8. And that just felt so strange to me to go from one aspect of the character to another. It just feels to me that the overall vision for Harumi and the overall vision for, well, the season as a whole could have been a lot tighter. And that finally gets us to the final constraint I want to talk about here, which is, one, maintaining a quote-unquote healthy status quo, which is something Ninjago wants to do, which is a constraint. And the other constraint is that they wanted to leave as much as possible up for interpretation by the audience, which I think is the biggest mistake, bar none, that this season made, was the decision to want to leave as much stuff as possible up for interpretation. Ninjago has never really been a choose-your-own-adventure type thing. Sure, there have been a lot of really cool stuff that Ninjago has done to allow people to maybe imagine stuff that happens behind the scenes in the background of different seasons, that maybe you just barely didn't see this happening, but you can imagine them on their own adventures and their own stories. But when you're writing a season of a TV show, I really don't feel that the right choice is to not make any decisions, to consciously not make decisions about your characters, and to instead just go, I don't know, the viewers will figure it out. Because that's not the job of the viewers. The job of the storyteller is to, well, tell a story. But if you're telling a story that is specifically designed to not have a conclusive ending, to just let the viewer decide, I don't think Ninjago's that kind of story, to be honest. And that was one of the most disappointing things to me, is that there were so many threads that were just left open. We don't know how Harumi stands with the ninja. We don't know if the ninja have their powers back. We don't know why destroying the Oni temple and the Overlord's temple, we don't really know if that had any effect on Ninjago. We know canonically in Ninjago that destroying one temple can wreak havoc in another land. Does that actually make an effect here? Is there any impact? I don't know. There are so many questions that we have unanswered here that I feel is a major misstep of the writers of the show, of the folks in charge of creating Ninjago. Why did you leave everything so open-ended? That is something that is honestly just really frustrating to me as an audience member, to just not have answers to a lot of the stuff. And I'm not expecting answers to a lot of things. For a lot of lore-based things, I actually prefer it when we don't have answers to everything, because it's cool to come up with your own reasons. But for big character arcs, I don't think we should be deciding if Lloyd forgives Harumi or not. I think that should be something that should be clear in the show. And especially with a character like Harumi who is so controversial, I don't think the question of whether or not she is redeemed should have been left a question. I think it should have been pretty comprehensive and conclusive. And there are just so many other things that I could talk about with regards to that. I haven't even scratched the surface of many of the other things that were left unresolved, specifically around character arcs, and we will get to those later on. But I just felt that was a major misstep to me, which was just a lack of resolution with so many things, which was a constraint on the show. But now with that, we can probably move on to some specific things that I wanted to talk about. The final thing here is, yes, I wanted to talk about inconsistencies. There are a lot of strange inconsistencies in the way that things are said in the dialogue of this season. For instance, Garmadon specifically says, for example, he says, "Oh, I was resurrected from the cursed realm instead of the departed realm." Technically, he was resurrected from the departed realm. He was not resurrected from the cursed realm. The cursed realm got destroyed, but honestly, it's not that big of a deal, because especially he was technically in the cursed realm when it was destroyed and then went to the departed realm, so I don't really care. That's not a big deal. The bigger deal is that when Cole is talking about Princess or Queen Vanya, at the end of the particular show that she appeared in, Season 13, there was a whole coronation, Vanya is crowned as queen, and it is a really important part of her character arc that she was able to become queen, and Cole was able to be a big part in how she became queen. But then he specifically corrects another character. He corrects Racer 7. When she says queen, he's like, "No, princess." Which Tommy literally just said, "Oh, that was a mistake. I just forgot that she was crowned queen." I guess the writers kind of forgot that they crowned one of their main characters queen at the end of the season that she was in. I don't know. That was very odd to me how that was just a mistake. And there were a lot of things here that, understandably, Tommy can't come in and fix everything. He should not be expected to come in and say, "Oh, this and this and this is a mistake, let's fix all this." I don't even necessarily blame him. I do blame somebody. I think somebody should have been around to realize that mistakes like these were happening, and it just feels a little bit sloppy to me, to be honest, to have just so many mistakes happening, things that have no excuse of being there. There are just obvious mistakes and errors there that I just think is so odd that shouldn't have happened in Crystalized. And again, belays some weird stuff relating to what seemed to be like budget issues, where I'm like, I don't know what the budget was happening in the season, what the issues were pertaining to budget, or that certain things just weren't caught. And that is one of the things that is not a big deal. It is by no means one of the most important complaints I have about the season at all. It's just something I felt that feels sloppy about the overall end finale of the season itself. But with that, I think it's now time to go into the meat of this issue, and I realize we are many minutes in, but the meat of this issue are the character arcs. And that has a lot that I want to talk about. We have Lloyd's arc, we have Nia's arc, we have Harumi's arc, the ninja's arc, the usage of the Crystal Council, and the Overlord. And oh man, this is going to be a long one. I am already getting tired just thinking about the many complaints about Crystalized and the many things that went wrong and could have been done better, and let's just get into it right now. Okay, so Lloyd. Like it or not, Lloyd is the main character of Ninjago. He is the main focus of this season, and he definitely should have been. As the quote-unquote final season of this era of Ninjago, yes, Lloyd should have been the focus, and he definitely was. So let's talk about Lloyd's arc throughout the season, and I guess the past few seasons as a whole. Because there's a couple things that they actually made long-term threads for how Lloyd kind of sees things and his point of view. Number one, the biggest thing that impacts Lloyd. He doesn't want to become his father. That is his greatest fear. We've seen that in Season 11. We started kind of seeing this in March of the Oni, especially after Garmadon was brought back, but he clearly desperately misses the time when Sensei Garmadon was in his quote-unquote good form. He misses those days, and he wishes that his father could be the way that he was back in those days, but he knows that that is impossible, which makes him really lash out at Garmadon, even when Garmadon does try to do the right thing in his own twisted way, and that is a really interesting way of approaching the character of one of the main heroes. The other major thing about Lloyd is that he has a lot of hang-ups around Harumi. Almost every single arc in even the most recent seasons of Ninjago have been issues with Lloyd surrounding Harumi and the big betrayal that happened to him, and how he can't really trust a lot of people again after that. In Season 11, he complains all the time to Akita about how he was betrayed by Harumi and how that's weighing on him. In Season 12, he faces off against Harumi, and it is really, really emotionally damaging to him to see her again in the video game, which is why it was chosen, because the game scanned his mind and realized that was something that would trigger him. In Season 13, he doesn't trust Princess Vanya because he doesn't trust princesses because of Harumi. Every single aspect of Lloyd's character arc has been building towards Harumi's return, which we'll talk about Harumi coming back, but again, it was a cool idea to bring her back because that is a big facet of his arc. Now, Lloyd's arc throughout the season was a very interesting one, and if done right, this could have been one of the most interesting character arcs in any piece of LEGO media. So when we first saw set images, we saw the Golden Oni Lloyd being featured on the Golden Ultra Dragon. And that was a very, very exciting concept, because obviously in the past, we have known Oni form to be something to be considered evil. We know that Oni are the pure embodiment of evil. That is what they are. They exist only to destroy. However, in Season 9, we get a little bit of characterization. We meet Mistake, and that's another big one. We meet Mistake in Season 9, and she is an Oni who turned good. She fell in love with the beauty of the world of Ninjago, and chose to side with the Spinjitzu Master instead of the Oni. She was one of the 3 Oni warlords, Tommy Anderson confirmed. She was actually one of the 3 Oni warlords who wielded the masks of vengeance, hatred, and deception, and she used her powers against her own Oni comrades to save Ninjago and end the war. And that was a really cool example of how not everything is black and white. While a certain person or being may appear evil at first glance, or maybe even was created to just be evil, they have a lot of stuff going on that you might not know about. Characters are three-dimensional. The world is not black and white. That was what Season 9 Hunted was trying to tell us when they made Mistake and Oni as one of the main heroes in the story, which I thought was very cool. I love that Hunted did that. I thought the character of Mistake was really interesting, how they actually was able to kind of introduce an Oni who turned good and one who was using the powers of darkness against the forces of evil. Which is why it is very strange that despite Mistake serving as Lloyd's mentor throughout the entire season, she filled the sensei role for Lloyd. When Lloyd thought he had lost everyone, she came in and was his sensei. She was his mentor. She taught him how to resist. She taught him how to fight back against his father. He doesn't mention her or think of her once. Not once is Mistake mentioned in the season that is entirely focused on Lloyd realizing that Oni are not all bad and can do some good. Why? Why? I don't understand this. What was the point of that? It is absolutely baffling to me why this wasn't considered, because the entire character arc, again for Lloyd, is, for one, he has to realize that his father, who is basically now completely given in to his Oni form, is not all bad. And just because somebody is an Oni doesn't mean they're bad. But he knows this. He knows this because his mentor was Mistake. When Mistake was revealed to be an Oni, he didn't even have that many problems in Season 9. He kind of took it in stride, and he was pretty happy they had an Oni on their side. So I don't understand where this is coming from for Lloyd's character. Did the writers just forget about Mistake? I don't get it. I really do not understand it. I actually had this question asked to Tommy about, like, what was the deal with Mistake? Why was she not mentioned in this season? And he didn't really explain why. And that was something that I found very odd, because he kind of shied away from the question, or he didn't quite answer it. I'd love to maybe ask him it again. Maybe he misunderstood it, but I just don't know why Mistake wasn't mentioned. And I think the answer was something along the lines of, well, we had a lot of stuff to talk about, and that's just one very small detail from an old season that not a lot of people will remember. But it's a pretty big detail of Lloyd's character. I mean, okay, you bring back Pythor. You haven't seen Pythor since Day of the Departed. That's 2016. Is Mistake such an irrelevant part of a 2018 season that it isn't relevant to mention her once? Not even bring her back, just to mention that at some point in Lloyd's past he encountered an Oni that was good. Very, very strange to me how that was set up. And it kind of paints Lloyd as almost being Oni racist, or like, I don't know, not seeing how Oni could be good for some reason. It's just very out of character and strange for him, especially how good he was with Mistake in Season 9. The other part of Lloyd's character arc, which is probably the most disappointing here, is that, again, his entire arc and his stubbornness throughout the season was that Lloyd believes that Oni are all bad, and he believes that everything related to the Oni is bad. If you are an Oni, you are a bad person, and you cannot change, and people do not change. That was what, you guessed it, Garmadon was saying back in the Oni trilogy. Garmadon's entire point was that, a direct quote is that people don't change, they only reveal who they truly are. And Garmadon was revealed to be wrong, because people can change. Mistake was a great example of somebody changing, and that was something Garmadon, in his evil form, couldn't understand. And they were writing it up so that Lloyd was wrong about this. Lloyd was wrong about his father. He keeps telling Garmadon he can't change, and Garmadon is all evil, because he is an Oni. But what I thought was the entire point of Lloyd's character arc was that he was going to be realizing that just because you're an Oni doesn't mean you're bad, and he himself is part Oni. As a descendant of the first Benjutsu Master, Lloyd is as much Oni as he is Dragon, and the point was to embrace the Oni side of him, understand that darkness is a part of him, but realize that he can overcome the darkness and not all negative emotions are bad. And this even ties into Zane's arc. The entire point of Zane's arc this season is that not all negative emotions are bad. There is, and you can guess it, a benefit to grief. That is literally the entire point of the Inner Steel song. That is the entire point of Sally's episode. There is the episode called The Benefit of Grief. The point of that in the season was to say, yes, negative emotions have a place with us. It is not healthy to bottle up negative emotions, it's not healthy to pretend they don't exist, and it's not healthy to pretend they're not a positive part of who people are, and there are ways that negative emotions can be used in good ways. Grief is a really good way of coming to terms with a loss. That is a really good way of telling kids that not everything they feel is bad, and if they are feeling bad, it's not necessarily a bad thing, and it is something that is completely normal and human. That's such a good message. And that is a really good and fairly complex, I mean, it's not that complex, but for a kid's show, that is a pretty good, complex message about morality that you can tell to kids. But here's what they did instead. Lloyd turns into his Oni form, and he is overwhelmed by anger when he thinks that his father has been killed by the Overlord. He thinks Garmadon is dead, he is blinded by rage, and he turns into this Oni monstrosity, and he starts firing beams of dark energy at the Overlord, and it's on. It is a main fight between him, and it lasts literally a couple of seconds. I don't even think it lasts over 10 seconds. He sees his own expression and says, no, this isn't who I am. Oh no, he literally gets scared of his own expression, and decides not to be an Oni, not to embrace his Oni side. And how does he defeat the Overlord? Because I was thinking, when I was watching this, I was in disbelief. I remember saying out loud, there is no way that's it. He is definitely going, because look at that. That Oni form had 4 arms, the set form is 2 arms, that Oni form had purple eyes, the set form is green eyes. I don't read too much into minifigures, but hey, you know what would be really cool? If Lloyd realized that, again, Oni and Dragon are just 2 sides of the same coin. He is part Oni and Dragon, and the only way to defeat someone trying to tip balance is to become the ultimate embodiment of what it means to be in balance, to be both Oni and Dragon. So I was thinking, oh, this is wonderful. He is going to use his Oni form and maybe use it to summon the Golden Ultra Dragon. And that showcases how he is the perfect dichotomy. He represents the balance between good and evil within him. All good is just as bad as being all bad, and that was the whole point of it. Or so I thought. Because after that, he just doesn't use the Oni form once. He never uses it again, after using it for a couple of seconds. That is so weird to me. What was up with that? What message are we trying to tell here? Because the message that I'm taking away from this, which is a pretty dangerous one, is that Lloyd is right. People are black and white. People can be all good and all bad. If you think someone is all bad, they probably are all bad. And you are right to not trust them, if they are what you consider to be an Oni. I guess, to use an allegory here, if you have a predetermined notion about someone, and you believe that they are bad, and you believe they cannot change, then you are right. That is what the message here is. That is what Lloyd is saying. invalidating him that yes, his Oni side is bad. He should not be using his Oni side. It represents everything bad about him, and it is a negative thing. That is a very dangerous message to tell the kids. Now here's the thing. I don't think by any means that was the intent of the message. I certainly hope that wasn't the intent. I don't know why anybody would want to put that message in a children's show, because that's just wrong. Your notions about a person, your preconceived notions about whether they're good or bad, doesn't define who they are as people. Nobody is just plain black and white good or bad. But why was his character arc validating him? What has Lloyd learned? Even taking morality aside, what has Lloyd learned in this season? Okay, he has learned that being an Oni means that you are bad. What else has he learned? I don't know. That he shouldn't trust Oni? That if somebody is bad that he believes to be bad, he shouldn't trust them? Harumi only turned against the Overlord because she heard that the Overlord killed her, or is, I guess, responsible for killing her parents. The Overlord is responsible for the Devourer. She didn't turn good because she felt that what the Overlord was doing was wrong. She turned against the Overlord because she wanted revenge. There are two very different things there. Lloyd as a character has not grown or changed in how he sees the world. He will still see the world in terms of black and white. Nothing has changed. What? I'm so confused. I genuinely don't get it. What is Lloyd's character arc here? Please, viewers in the comments, if you have a better idea of what his character arc was supposed to be, please tell me. Because the entire season they are spent building towards him, 1, rejecting Garmadon's push for him to accept his Oni form because he thinks everything Oni is bad. 2, he is rejecting his own father Garmadon because he believes that as an Oni, he is pure evil and nothing can change that. And 3, he believes people cannot change. If you are an Oni, you can't change. That is the stuff that villains say. That's the stuff that Garmadon was saying when Garmadon was in his villain format. So then why, may I ask, was he proven right at the end of the season? The point of a character arc is for a character to change, is for a character to learn something, is for a character to grow. But Lloyd doesn't grow. He doesn't change. He is validated in what he thinks. I think I've harped on this point enough. It is something that actually genuinely is, I don't know if I would say upsetting, but it genuinely really frustrates me about how the show is written, in that they are so dedicated to not taking risks. They're so afraid of pushing things outside the boundaries that they are willing to potentially have a very negative message be sent in a TV show because they don't want characters to learn, they don't want them to change their worldview, and they want to maintain, you guessed it, a healthy status quo. That is something that really gets on my nerves here and is something that really genuinely upsets me about the way Ninjago is written. Because we've seen in the past, Ninjago has done really good jobs at kind of telling us different things and telling different stories and showing how characters can change, physically and emotionally. They've done that a lot. I don't know why they won't do it for this season, and to end the season on that was very, very disappointing. Overall, I think Lloyd's character arc is the biggest crime this season commits. It is not boring, it is interesting in the way that it was set up, and it had a very obvious payoff. The payoff was glaring them in the face to show Lloyd and to show the world that not everything is black and white, and you have to accept both the good and the bad inside you. And they just don't follow up on that, which is just so disappointing to me, and very, very sad about how Ninjago, I think I saw a quote on Twitter about this, which really stuck with me. Ninjago used to be a morality show that had some comedy in it, and it used to tell good stories and tell good character arcs, and they were funny. Ninjago has always been a really funny show. But now Ninjago feels like a comedy show with some little bits of morals and lessons sprinkled in, which ultimately don't really matter. It's kind of regressed as a piece of kids' media. A lot of the reason why a lot of timeless kids media is around nowadays, Avatar: The Last Airbender, even Star Wars to an extent is made for, a lot of the movies are made to entertain kids. Those are all around nowadays because they tell complex stories, and they tell good stories about light and dark and how not everything is black and white. And Ninjago has just failed. And that they have failed on that core concept for this season, and that is really, really disappointing to me. And I have never been on this channel as harsh as I am being right now on anything LEGO has done. I am genuinely very, very positive, generally very, very positive on everything LEGO does. Sure, I complain here and there and say things could be better, but nothing has actually let me down as much as this has, and that's just sad. I'm disappointed because I love Ninjago so much. I still think Ninjago is one of the best pieces of media LEGO has ever made. That's why it pains me so much to see them just not reaching their full potential when it comes to telling compelling character arcs. And oh boy, this is just Lloyd's. This has been 16 minutes, 17 minutes of just talking about Lloyd's character arc here. And we have a lot more to go, because there's a lot more. That's the main one, though. That is the big complaint. You could end the video here and say, that's the big mistake Crystalized makes. That's fine. But that wasn't the only big mistake they made, because we also have Nia, we have Harumi, we have the Crystal Council, we have the Ninja, and we have the Overlord. So let's get into Nia. I think this will be a little shorter, but let's get into Nia now. Okay, it's Nia time. I have always thought that Nia has had one of the most interesting character arcs throughout the entire show for pretty much any of the main characters. As a quick recap, Nia went from someone who kind of just started off as the damsel in distress to really being her own character. Her character arc in Season 1 was wonderful. She did not even want to consider the possibility of being the Green Ninja because she saw how competitive and how negative it had made the rest of the boys treat each other. She kind of evolved into her own character by always wanting to do her own thing. She did not want to be defined by other people's expectations of her. Obviously, when she becomes Samurai X, that's a really cool thing that is something that is unique to her. And one of the really interesting things about Nia is that in Skybound, her character arc kind of came to a head, and we got the most development, I would say, we have ever gotten for any single Ninjago character ever in Skybound with Nia. Nia's entire character arc in Skybound is that how she doesn't want to be defined by the expectations of others. She's always felt that other people define who she is, whether it's the Water Ninja, or a member of the team, or even Jade's girlfriend, and she didn't want to be kind of shackled by those expectations until she realizes that there are pieces of her that she can take agency over, and Skybound is a really amazing tale of her coming into her own and having this incredible character arc of going from being kind of reticent or afraid of embracing what she wanted and choosing her own destiny, to being willing to open up to the people she's close to and say, I don't know what I want for my own destiny, all I want is to be able to choose it myself, and to have my own agency. And that was a very, very strong point with Nia's character arc going into Crystalized. Because of course, Nia had a very good character arc in the last season's Seabound as well, which again, kind of points to her being one of the best characters in terms of actually changing and growing over time. Obviously, we kick things off with Crystalized, with Nia realizing that she doesn't want to be in this ocean form forever. No matter how amazing it is and how much fun she has and how at home she feels in the ocean, she has a responsibility to her friends. She has a responsibility to the world of Ninjago. And so she is the one to go out and contact her friends and her companions to say, hey, you need to bring me back, here's what you have to do. Giving her that agency was the right choice, and that is my favorite thing about how they treated Nia this season. It is also the only thing they ever did with Nia's character arc this season. Because after that, you guessed it, she does literally nothing. And that is honestly very insulting to me. And it's really insulting to fans of Nia and fans of writing and fans of good content and good television. And let me explain. So the first 6 episodes are mostly dedicated to bringing Nia back. After she was kind of the main character of the previous season, she took a bit of a step back for the first few episodes of Seabound and essentially instructed the ninja on how to bring her back and let them take it into their own hands. And I was so excited because Nia has been set up for years now, since season 11, that her greatest fear is being normal. We saw her mirror reflection in the season 11 Greatest Fears mirror. That was, hey, this is her in her normal clothes. She is afraid of being a normal person. She desperately does not want to be that. She doesn't want to be defined by just being a standard person. She wants something else unique to define her. Now I thought that this was going to be building up to a really interesting character arc for her, where she realized she doesn't need powers to be a hero. She doesn't need powers to be special. Just because she doesn't have powers doesn't mean she's normal. Being herself is what makes her unique. Being herself as Samurai X. Being herself as just a hero who saves people. Being her own person is what means that she is special and she is not normal, quote unquote, or what she believes to be normal. That's a really great message to tell kids because they never really followed up on her character fear in season 11 being normal. I don't think we ever really got any resolution on that, which is why it was very exciting to me that not only when they brought her back, that they actually obviously brought her back without powers, but she's wearing the same exact outfit that she saw in her greatest fear reflection of her being quote-unquote normal. Now this is ripe for opportunity. That is so interesting to write a character arc about her grappling with, now that she doesn't have her powers, who is she? What is her role on the team? What does she represent to the people of Ninjago? Will they still see her as a hero? She was very concerned a lot, or I guess a big part of her arc in Skybound was, how do people see me? And she was frustrated with how people saw her in states that were defined by not her own choices. And this was a really cool way to go out there and say, hey, I don't want people to just see me as the water ninja. I'm not that anymore. I don't have my powers, but that's not a bad thing. I am my own person. And then, here's what they do with Nia after bringing her back. They bring her back. She's in the same clothes that she wore when she was in her mirror reflection. I was like, oh my goodness, this is going to be really cool. They're going to do a lot of stuff. And in the next episode, I don't think she has any... Let me go through. Okay, she's got a couple of speaking lines. She talks about how she's powerless to help her friends. And Sensei Wu says she was known as Samurai X in the past, so maybe she could do that. And hopefully she'll find herself in that. And that's it. So that's the next episode. The one where the ninja are actually convicted, she's just in the background and doesn't do anything. In the 8th episode, let's see, is there any Nia appearance? Okay, a couple of appearances where she, literally a couple 5-second scenes where she decides to be Samurai X again. Mind you, no mention of how PIXAL is already Samurai X. That could have been a cool conflict. That could have been an interesting thing, where PIXAL basically was given the Samurai X mantle by Nia. Nia endorsed her to become the new Samurai X. But now Nia's just coming back and saying, hey, I'm Samurai X again. And I can do good by being Samurai X, and not really considering how PIXAL feels about it, who seemingly doesn't care. I mean, PIXAL doesn't comment on it at all. We barely even see PIXAL for a lot of this season, so I don't know. Maybe she didn't care. That's just feels like a missed opportunity to me for actual character growth and interactions. But then again, I think Nia becoming Samurai X was not a bad idea, because the whole point of her character is realizing that she can be special without her powers. And being special is just what she considers herself to be, and she doesn't have to care about what other people say. However, after that, she makes a split-second decision to become Samurai X, makes a new mech, and proceeds to do literally nothing, and I mean nothing, the rest of the season. She is not even an action figure. It is worse than Skylar. Skylar, it's kind of become a meme how they brought Skylar back, and in most of the episodes, she's literally just in the background with no speaking lines, watching. Not saying anything, just standing there, with nothing to do, no character arc whatsoever, until a couple of episodes where they've got some small character moments. That is not... Nia's not quite as bad as that, but she's in the Skylar Crystalized territory of just being background fodder and an action figure. And that's one of my least favorite tropes about media, is when they bring in an interesting character, and they have a really interesting backstory, and they have really interesting motivations for who they are and what types of people they are, and then you go into the action and they're just an action figure, and they don't do anything, they don't really have character beats, and they're just there to sell toys and to look cool. And I'm gonna be honest, that's what Nia was for the rest of the season. 6 episodes in, you bring her back. She's barely even in the first 6 episodes, because again, she was in water form and frozen. In 7 and 8, she has a decision to become Samurai X again. Is she even in 9? She shows up as 9 in a few seconds as Samurai X and flies off, and we don't see her again. She's not in the Benefit of Grief, which is the 10th episode. She's not in... Is she in the 5th villain at all? No. Oh my goodness. Neo just wasn't there. Where was she? This is so strange to me, and it feels disrespectful that after they brought her back, they essentially made her a side character in her own story. A lot of times with the Ninjago side characters, like Misako for example. Misako will show up for the first couple of episodes, she'll give some exposition, and she'll disappear for most of the season, then maybe come back later on to give some final moments of exposition, and that's it. The same even goes for Sensei Wu at some points. Sometimes Wu is not the focus of the season, because the focus is on the core 6 heroes. Note how I said 6, Nia being one of the 6. For whatever reason, Nia just wasn't in most of the season, and they basically just didn't even give us any episodes dedicated to her point of view, or even any moments in episodes dedicated to how she was feeling grappling with her greatest fear of being normal without any powers. Why? What was the idea behind that? What is Nia's character arc in this season? I don't know. Nia does not grow, Nia does not change. And the most egregious thing, the thing that angers me, I think, the most about how Nia's character arc was handled, was that she randomly gets her powers back, and they don't explain how, And I guess the explanation is power is never really gone, and powers will always return to you. There is precedent for that, because after Asphira stole Kai's powers, they kind of returned in the second half of Season 11, so I guess there's precedent for it. But then, why, I ask, did we go through this entire arc of Nia sacrificing who she is to become the most powered-up version of herself, to lose her personality, save the world, and then come back? She came back, became what her greatest fear was, which was someone who is powerless, became Samurai X again very, very quickly, disappeared off screen for many episodes, and then comes back with a little bit of her powers just kind of being back there. And you know what's the worst thing? Is that when they actually had Kai lose his powers in Season 11, and I can't believe I'm talking about Season 11 as doing something better than this, because Season 11 is not a perfect season by any means and made a lot of mistakes. But Kai has a big moment. In the final episodes of Season 11, he has a moment where he breaks through his, mental barrier or something like that, and he unlocks his fire again. And there's a big explosive moment where he saves his team from the dragon. Nia doesn't have this moment. Nia's hype moment in the finale is using her powers to knock over a pipe, which falls on the mechanic. The mechanic then gets up and says he taunts Nia. He says that she is nothing without her powers, and she's just a helpless girl. And you know what happens right after that? She's saved! Nia is saved by somebody else. She does not save herself. She does not retort back and say, oh, you think I'm helpless? No, I have these powers. I'm special because I have these, which is pretty problematic that she's only defined as being special because of her powers, but she doesn't even get to save herself. She is saved by Okino. And one of her final lines in the entire show is hyping up Okino because they couldn't get his voice actor back because they ran out of budget. What? What is this? Like, what is this character arc? I am so confused as to what the entire point of her whole story was here. And to me, this feels not only disrespectful, but honestly kind of harmful on a few levels, especially for young girls who are fans of Nia, who are fans of Ninjago, because yet again I say, much like with Lloyd, what message are we sending here to the kids? What message are we saying? Okay, Nia thinks that the only thing that makes her special are her powers. She has said this before, we know that's her greatest fear. She essentially has to face her greatest fear when she is brought back seemingly with no powers. And then she realizes that, no, she can do some good as Samurai X still. Sure, they didn't spend a lot of time on it, and it wasn't really focused on it all. We definitely could have used more time, but at least you had that, right? You had her becoming Samurai X again, and say, you know what, I can do a lot of good, even as Samurai X. I don't need powers to be a hero. Which, like, sure, that's pretty good. I could have used a lot more screen time dedicated to that, but okay, sure. And then you have her randomly start getting her powers back throughout the season. And when she first did that, I think I was taken aback. When she first kind of generated water spheres around her hands in the middle of an episode randomly, I think I literally paused the episode and I went, what is going on? What is this? I was so confused. What character arc is Nia going to go through that she spent the entire last season losing her powers, or I guess kind of becoming one with the water, and we spend the entire first half of the season getting her back but being powerless and forcing her to deal with the repercussions of her actions and choosing to become a hero while still being powerless, and she just gets him back. And they don't even come back in a satisfying way. No. That would have been too much of a I don't know, good screenwriting. She gets them back, and she proceeds to do literally nothing with them. She, I guess, uses them to trigger a fire hydrant once, which beats back the mechanic. The mechanic was also, like, oddly sexist in the season. Like, I feel like they just didn't have, or they ran out of things or characteristics to give the villains. So they were like, okay, each villain should face off against a hero. That leaves the mechanic as facing off against Nia. What do? Okay, make him sexist. Make him say, like, oh, you're just a little girl, you need saving. But the mechanic was proven right. At the end of the season, she needed saving. She was not able to beat him. Let me pull up the mechanic's last lines. This is actually something that really, really annoyed me. No golden wings for you. What happened? Mocking chuckle. Guess that means you're not a real ninja, just a girl in a costume. What Nia says in return is she kind of does this thing with her powers, and she uses her powers to knock over a pipe, which is filled with water, and it kind of falls on the mechanic. And she says, how's that? Real enough? And then she gets attacked by the mechanic's guards. Jay's calling for her to look out. Jay saves her from the guards, and the mechanic is about to shoot her with his cannon while she's distracted. So she is vulnerable. She is about to be defeated by the mechanic. And Okino jumps in out of nowhere. So mechanic's like, "Who are you?" And Nia says he is Okino. Okino poses, and that's it. The scene ends. What? What is this as a resolution to Nia's character arc? I am so confused. What on earth? What is this? What am I watching here? This to me is one of the biggest betrayals that Crystalized did, because let's just kind of step back and look at some of the implications here, and I don't want to get, I don't know, too political, I don't know if that's the word here, but if you look at the way this looks, is that the very sexist mechanic, who has been shown to be sexist in the course of the season, calling her a little girl and saying that she's useless and saying that she's nothing without her powers, is, okay, he's knocked over by a pipe by her using her powers, which is not a very, I guess, impressive display of powers, but it knocks him over for a little bit. His soldiers then attack her, upon which she needs to be saved by Jay. She is about to be overwhelmed. And then the mechanic gets up again, tries to shoot her, and Nia doesn't save herself, she is saved by some other guy. What lesson are we telling to young girls here? What is the point of this? The mechanic was right. Nia was just a helpless girl in a costume. She was unable to defend herself against him. She fought back for a little bit, and then he had the upper hand, and she was saved by someone else. I don't think that's a good lesson. Now, I don't think that was intentional, and I'm probably making it sound a lot worse than it actually is. I think it was just very frustrating to me how they really set up Nia for a very interesting character arc here, and just didn't do anything with it. And that's a recurring theme throughout this video and a recurring theme throughout the season, is wasted potential. And we'll end the video with thoughts on this. But there is so much potential in Nia facing her greatest fear, in Nia becoming Samurai X again, in Nia realizing that powers aren't the answer to everything, or in Nia realizing that, yeah, now that I have my powers, I can prove people who doubted me wrong, and show them that they're wrong about me, and I am my own person, and I can fight them with my own strength. But she doesn't. She doesn't at all, and I don't know. I'm going to sound like a broken record here. It's just frustrating. It's frustrating is the word for it, because the answer's right there. The answer is glaring them in the face. This is what you do with Nia. This is what you do with your character. That's a really strong arc, where she can be an example to people watching the show, girls and boys, that you don't need powers to be special. You don't need something that is innate, that's genetic, that's passed down to you from your parents. You can make a name for yourself. You can be a hero without being anybody special in terms of powers. And just being you is special enough. And that's what being special means. And just didn't do anything with it. Didn't do anything. And to add insult to injury, in the final scenes of Nia in the season, she is proven wrong. And the mechanic is proven right. And that she was defenseless against him. And she needed her boyfriend and another guy to save her. I don't know. That does not sit right with me whatsoever. I am not happy with how that was handled. Again, I don't think it was intentional. What I imagine, this is the logic behind what happened. They didn't want to pay for Alessandro Giuliani, Vakama, to come back and voice Okino. So they were like, okay, we want to have the funny I am Okino line in there, but it's got to be said by someone else. Oh, let's make him save someone and have that person say he is Okino, and that's a hype moment because everyone is like, oh yeah, that's my favorite character from Prime Empire. I just think they didn't quite think through how that looks, because it doesn't look very good to have her entire arc lead up to this and just have her have to be saved. If she had maybe even a more impressive display of her powers, maybe she could cause a big tidal wave to swoop over the mechanic and his whole army, and have Nia save herself, right? That's the whole point of her character. We want her to be able to save herself. Why was she relegated again to the damsel in distress in her final moments of the Ninjago television series? I don't get it, and it is very, very annoying. Now, I said I was not going to spend as much time on Nia as I did Lloyd, and here I am, having spent more time on her than I did with Lloyd. But again, just something that's very frustrating to me with how the character was handled. But speaking of Lloyd, I think it's time we talk about Harumi, because Harumi is the other very, very big one here. And I'm going to say again, I hope I don't spend as much time on these ones as I do with Harumi. This is already going to be a very long video. So I want to thank you all for staying this far. If you have made it this far in the video, comment below. Say you're sticking through. You're listening to the whole review, the whole unfiltered, unformatted, unscripted review of Crystalized. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Let's talk about Harumi. So I'll come out and say it right now, Harumi, in my opinion, is one of the best Ninjago villains ever. She is definitely probably one of my favorite Ninjago villains. She may even be my favorite. When Harumi first arrived on the scene in Season 8 Sons of Garmadon, which is basically widely considered to be the best Ninjago season ever, which I think I agree with. I'd have to think a little bit more on that, but I'm pretty sure I agree. Harumi really made waves because she was a much different villain compared to all of the other villains we've gotten in the past. She did not have powers, she was not some mystical being bent on revenge against Wu, she did not have any elemental abilities of her own, she was not anything super special, she was a regular person. But she had a very personal, direct vendetta against the ninja, which made sense. The ninja failed to stop the Great Devourer from, well, devouring her parents. That is a very strong and believable motivation for someone to have grown up as an orphan and to have their entire worldview twisted by this one tragedy that happened to them. That was such a strong motivation for Harumi. Very cool how her character started, and while she kind of was relegated to more of a side villain once Garmadon was brought back, she was always still one of the most compelling parts of the entire story. Whether it was seeing Garmadon as her surrogate father figure, or kind of her dynamic with Lloyd, which was very interesting and very kind of flirtatious at first, and then she kind of revealed her dark side in Game of Masks, one of the best Ninjago episodes ever. Harumi was always one of the most interesting characters we got from Ninjago. And when she died, I thought that was a really good ending for her. She, in her final moments, realized that she was creating more versions of herself. The damage that she was causing, indirectly, was creating more Harumis, was separating more children from their families. And it wasn't even a redemption, it was more of a moment of regret and remorse, where she was realizing that, oh my goodness, what have I done? What have I messed up here? I need to save somebody before history repeats itself and somebody else ends up like me. And then she dies. And that was the perfect ending to the character. There is no redemption. There is no such thing as Harumi joining the ninja team. She doesn't get a happy ending. She gets probably one of the most depressing endings of all of Ninjago, where she realizes that she is kind of responsible for the actions that she's caused. She realizes that in her entire quest to prove the ninja wrong and to give Ninjago a new ruler that would keep it safe, she has doomed so many people to suffer the same fate as her, and to grow up like her as orphans. And she does not have a resolution to this. She does not get absolved of guilt. She does not get to walk away scot-free. She is punished for her misdeeds in death, and she dies realizing that she's made mistakes and she can barely do anything to make up for it. That was such a strong character arc for Harumi. That is so cool to actually have a Ninjago character go through this. Maybe in Bionicle you would see all sorts of character stuff like that. But for Ninjago, that was something that was really different and really fresh. And that was really great about how Harumi's character was handled. Of course, her character had a lot of repercussions after her death, namely on Lloyd. And I didn't talk a lot about Harumi and Lloyd's relationship when I was talking about Lloyd's character arc because, well, I wanted to save it for talking about Harumi. Because obviously the two characters are pretty intrinsically linked. Now, Harumi left a very lasting impact on Lloyd. He's got a lot of trust issues now, and Harumi definitely did have one of the biggest impacts in terms of any Ninjago villain on one of the main characters, actually changing how they see the world, and showing some character growth, even if it's growth in the wrong direction, which was very interesting. Which is why the decision to bring her back, while not inherently a bad decision, was definitely a decision that should not have been taken lightly whatsoever. If you are going to bring back a character as divisive and a character as important and a character as well written as Harumi, you gotta be sure you're doing a good job of what she's doing. You gotta make sure that she has a reason to be there, and you have to make sure that her motivations are clear. What is her character going through now that she couldn't have gone through before? How is bringing her back actually changing her as a person and changing people around her? That is the main reason. I mean, if you're gonna bring a character back in fiction, you have to consider that you're kind of erasing any repercussions of her death. You are erasing any sort of things that characters have moved on from, and you're erasing a lot of goodwill that fans have built up, realizing that this story does have stakes and people do die, by just bringing someone back. So here's the thing. There are 1,000 ways they could have made Harumi's character be one of the most interesting characters here. From the start, I think it was pretty obvious that she was going to betray the Overlord in some way, shape, or form. I think everyone probably could have predicted that Harumi, who is notorious for, I don't know, switching sides, would betray her master and betray the Overlord, especially considering the Overlord's plan. What is baffling to me, though, is how little screen time Harumi got after she was brought back. So let's do a bit of a table of events here, and this is very reminiscent of some stuff that happened to her in Season 9 as well, where when Garmadon came to the forefront, she was kind of pushed to just be a minion, a henchman, a side villain. So what happened is that Harumi is brought back at the end of the Council of the Crystal King. She spends the next 4 episodes, taunting Lloyd. Nothing really happens in the next 4 episodes with her other than she's taunting Lloyd. She is being very, very odd in terms of a character with him. She's making jokes, dark jokes, but she's making jokes, which I don't think Harumi made a single joke in her villain form or in even her regular form. She is teasing Lloyd. She tries to kill his friends. She tries to kill all of the rest of the ninja again, which is what she originally tried to do, and then show to Lloyd that he has nothing left and he should just embrace his Oni side. She is doing all this really bad stuff. And then everything kind of changes randomly with the Coming of the King episode. And upon retrospect, this is probably the episode that fits in the least with the rest of the season. And again, it belays the fact that this season was written by a massive team of writers who, as Tommy specifically stated, disagreed on a great many things, one of which being how to handle Harumi's resurrection. Now, here's the thing about what happened here. In the Coming of the King, Harumi is ordered to kill Lloyd. She is ordered to destroy him, and she really doesn't want to do that, and she really believes that she can turn him over to their side. We also, through these episodes, learn of Harumi's motivations. She is resurrected by the Overlord, who essentially kind of forces her into service. She doesn't really have any other choice. He says, either you serve me, or you go to the departed realm and you die. You really have 2 choices. So Harumi doesn't want to die, so she's like, okay, yeah, I'll help you. The moment she realizes it's the Overlord, she doesn't want to help him. She says, I can't do that. You only exist to destroy. That's not what I'm about. If you remember what Harumi's character arc and what her entire motivation was in the initial seasons, she knew that there was a big threat coming in the form of the Oni. She knew that the only person powerful to stop the Oni was another Oni in the form of Garmadon. She wanted the Ninjago city, essentially, to be safer protected, to be protected by someone more powerful than the ninja who failed to save her parents. So, Harumi does not want to rule Ninjago, she does not want to destroy Ninjago, certainly not. Harumi wants Ninjago to be safe. Harumi wants Ninjago's protectors to be competent, not just, as she says, a bunch of kids playing dress-up. So, why would Harumi ever want to side with the Overlord, whose entire purpose is to destroy? The Overlord is basically the devil of Ninjago. He wants to destroy everything, he wants to kill everybody, or at least corrupt them to become dark matter versions of themselves. He is a bad dude. He is the real deal. He wants destruction. He is the threat that Harumi did everything she did in Season 8 and 9 to protect Ninjago from. He's worse than the Oni. The threat of somebody like the Overlord is the reason why Harumi did a lot of the things she did. So why would she side with him? Sure, she wants revenge against the ninja, I guess. Maybe? I don't know. Her reasoning is that Lloyd never looked for her in the rubble. Lloyd was being pursued by a giant stone titan, and as he said, he did go back and look for her anyways, and just didn't find her. Then she was like, oh, you were too late, or you didn't look hard enough, and that just feels like, I'm sorry, that just feels like a bad excuse to give her a grudge against Lloyd. And the worst thing is Lloyd agrees that she is right. Lloyd says, yeah, maybe you're right, maybe, I'm sorry, I should have looked harder for you. Huh? No, I don't think so. Harumi was trying to kill you, man. She was trying to kill you and all your friends. I do not blame Lloyd in the slightest for not immediately going back and looking for Harumi. It would have been physically impossible for him to go back and look for her because he was being chased by Garmadon's forces and a giant stone titan that had weakened Skylar and wounded her. He had a lot of other things to worry about, and he is not going to go look for the body of somebody who he saw die before him, who has been trying to kill him for the past 2 episodes. Why is Lloyd admitting that Harumi is right and he is wrong here? But anyways, okay, sure. The writers want to make it a legitimate grievance that Harumi has against Lloyd, so maybe that's why she wants revenge. Now, when she's talking to the Overlord, she first says that she can't serve him because he wants to destroy everything, which I was like, yeah, yeah, that's right. You shouldn't want to serve him because he wants to destroy everything. And then the Overlord says something very interesting, and this was a line that was featured in one of the early Ninjago trailers, and this got everybody talking. This got everyone speculating, oh, what does this mean? What could this mean about balance, about morality? This is raising some really interesting questions, because the Overlord says he wants there to be peace in the dark. Harumi wants peace, and he says, as long as there is conflict, as long as there is a quote-unquote balance, there's always going to be a fight between good and evil. And his point of view is that if he destroys one side, if all of good is eradicated and everyone lives in shadow, then there will be peace in the dark. And Harumi says, okay. She is convinced very easily, may I add. She's convinced in a matter of seconds. But again, these are 10-minute episodes. You gotta keep the pace snapping there. But she's like, okay, sure, I'll serve you. Whatever. Harumi buys it. The Overlord's like, great, and she basically goes fully into his service, which I think could have worked on a conceptual level, but there are a couple things that I feel like could have been changed to make it a little bit more convincing. I think that maybe, instead of turning everyone into freaky zombies, instead, perhaps the Overlord could have discovered a way to just, I don't know, make everybody docile but take away their free will. That would have been a very interesting way of doing things, where I can see Harumi getting behind that plan, where she's like, yeah, I don't think anybody should be fighting, I don't think there should be conflict, I think people's free will should be taken away, and they're just never going to fight again, and there's never going to be destruction, and everybody will live. That's a much more believable thing than, haha, I'm going to turn everybody into crazy zombies, and then they're going to be peaceful. I mean, I don't know. They don't look very peaceful to me. That's all I'm saying. I don't know why Harumi continues to buy this. But anyways, let's say that even if Harumi buys this and she's all in on the plan, whatever. Then we get to the coming of the king, when the Overlord himself comes back. And again, he orders Harumi to kill Lloyd. Harumi doesn't want to do this. And there's a very interesting conversation that they have, where Harumi basically says, hey look, as long as there's a difference between the balance, there's always going to be conflict. What the Overlord's doing is bring peace in the dark. I know the Overlord is stronger than you, so that's why I'm helping him. I just want one side to win, so people will stop fighting. And then Lloyd does something quite interesting. He takes Harumi's hand, throws him off of the Crystal King's temple, and they both plunge into Primeval's Eye together. And I was so excited for what could come next after that. I was very, very excited to see where are they taking this direction? What are they going to do? Is Harumi going to be convinced to join their side from now on? Is she going to work with the ninja? Is she going to be an ally? Is she going to be an enemy? What is he going to do with the morality here? What conversations are they going to have when they're at the bottom of Primeval's Eye? And that was super interesting. And then we get to the next episode, Return to Primeval's Eye. We cut to the jungle. Harumi's okay, and she's tricking him and laughing about how gullible he is as a person, and overall acting like a completely different character. She acts here like a goofy cartoon villain. She's teasing Lloyd, she's kind of playing coy with him, she's twisting his words, saying, oh, am I on your mind, are you thinking of me? And then trying to steal his sword, trying to escape, trying to alert the council to where she is. What? This does not feel consistent with her characterization from literally the previous episode, where she seemed very conflicted. She did not want the Crystal Council, again, she did not want them to find Lloyd, because she didn't want Lloyd to get killed. She knows that if they find him, they're gonna kill him. The Overlord said, destroy him. Like, get rid of that guy. So, what is the deal here? She says, literally 3 times, Lloyd, you are trusting, gullible, and weak. I thought that they were saying it so many times because it was like a joke. I thought at that point, I was just confused as to why they were saying it so many times. Like, was it a joke? What is the joke about that? Is it that she just keeps repeating herself? Like, what is the joke there? I don't really get that. I mean, maybe humor's subjective and all, I know that. I don't understand why they just had her keep repeating the same thing over and over again. It was very, very odd to me how they kept just doing that. So, her character does a complete 180, she goes back to the villains, and as Lloyd is flying away, she smirks at him and then runs off. She doesn't even have any look of remorse. She doesn't make it seem that she was just putting on an act. The moment she's alone with Lloyd, her personality completely shifts, and she's back to being a crazy, conniving villain. Even though when she was alone with him in the previous episode, she was not at all like this, and she was kind of trying to really plead with him to beg him to join their side and to see the point of view that she's coming from. So all of that was very odd to me, but I was like, okay, so they're doing something weird or funky with Harumi's character. I don't quite know why they're doing this, but surely they're going to address this in the future. We have many more episodes to see where Harumi's character goes. We've still got a long road ahead of us. Oh boy, how was I wrong? Because this is literally the last time Harumi has any meaningful lines of dialogue with anybody throughout the entire season. In the next few episodes, she has a conversation with the Overlord, where the Overlord basically says, "Haha, I know it. You're in love with Lloyd. That's why you don't want to kill him." And Harumi's like, "No, I'm not. No." And he's like, "Okay, well, whatever. It doesn't matter. I want to corrupt the ninja anyway, so who cares?" And that's it. For one, here, the big thing about this is that it implies that Harumi, because the Overlord is an expert at judging relationships, and he's really into drama, I guess. The Overlord is kind of, he loves his teen dramas and his love triangles and whatnot. He probably was behind the whole Cole-Mia love triangle and Cole-J, putting Cole's reflection there in the digital thing. The Overlord knows a little bit about love. Sure, let's say that. Whatever. This implies that Harumi actually has feelings for Lloyd, which is not what has been said at all. It has been explicitly stated that Harumi actually hates Lloyd. Most of all, she really despises him because she feels that he, as the prophesied savior, is directly responsible for her parents' death. She despises him, and she only pretends to like him to get on his good side and to manipulate him into getting Oni masks for her in Season 8. Now, sure, maybe you could argue that, okay, over the time they spent together in Season 8, she gained feelings for him, and she realized that he's not so bad, and he's actually a good person. But then I ask, where was this in Season 9? She was just as much of a villain in Season 9. She wanted him dead in Season 9. She was really going full force on let's get rid of Lloyd. She was urging Garmadon to kill him. She wanted Lloyd dead in Seasons 8 and 9. And she never showed anything different. Even in her final episode, she didn't even show any sort of love or remorse to Lloyd or anything like that. She just stopped parents from losing their child, and she stopped a child from losing their parents. That's it. Which is a really cool character arc and moment for her, but it doesn't show that she had feelings for Lloyd. Okay, but let's say that randomly she developed feelings for Lloyd off-screen, in between seasons, or when we thought she was dead. I don't know how much I buy that. I really don't. I think that if you're gonna build up a relationship like this, it has to be earned. Now, here's what I thought they were going to do. I thought, okay, maybe she doesn't want to see Lloyd destroyed for her own reasons, and she thinks that maybe he can be convinced to join their side. She maybe really believes that he could be convinced to join their side. Then what do? Well, what you should do is trap him in Primeval's Eye, which is great, and then force them to interact with each other. Force them to build up a relationship. Make it last a few more episodes. But no, it lasts one episode, and that entire episode is spent with her completely doing a 180 on her character and acting like a completely different person with Lloyd, and just being a villain. So, where did this come from? And here's the thing. So after that episode, it was Crystastrophe, the Overlord's talking to Harumi, and saying, "Oh, I know you have feelings for him, but it doesn't matter because I need him alive anyway." Harumi doesn't appear in any other episode until the very end. You can literally go back and check. There's one moment in one random episode where she flies by, looking at the streets, they play her theme song, and she doesn't say anything, and she just leaves. And she doesn't have any other character moments at all until the last few episodes. And here's what her character moments were. She realized that the Overlord was responsible for the Great Devourer. So she turns against the Overlord, yells, and starts to fight him, cuts off his hand. It's a pretty cool fight scene. And that's it. Her final lines are, in this order: Lloyd, Lloyd, are you okay? Lloyd. That's it. It's the last thing she says. Just Lloyd, 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 Lloyd. No, nothing else. No character, no nothing, no resolution, no character moments, no remorse, no regrets, no apologies. She doesn't apologize once for trying to kill the ninja. Nothing. And then guess what? She shows up at the end in the monastery, helping repair the monastery with the Sons of Garmadon, who are pretty big villains. But obviously they were kind of redeemed this season. They were convinced to be good by Ronin, so sure. But she shows up, sure, she's with the commissioner. And actually, during Tommy Andres' interview, he actually stated that, yeah, they wanted to keep it open-ended. Is Harumi a friend of the ninja? Is she redeemed? Well, she's with the commissioner. I don't know. Maybe she isn't. And he said, well, the implication is what they did with Ronin back at the end of Seabound, where obviously you saw him get thrown in jail at the end of the island, but then Ronin was attending Nia's funeral. So maybe he was let out to be at Nia's funeral, and maybe he does have some remorse and kind of, I don't know, he shows up for friends, people who were once his friends. Here's the issue with that, though. Harumi is not Ronin. Ronin did not try to kill the ninja multiple times in the same season that he appeared in. Ronin is not evil. Ronin is an opportunist. He makes money for himself. Sure, if that means screwing over the ninja once or twice here or there, yeah, he'll do it. Ronin is not inherently malicious. Ronin has never outwardly tried to actually have the ninja be harmed. Every time that Ronin inadvertently is involved in a villain's schemes, he is incredibly regretful, and he tries to help the ninja whenever he can, like in Possession. So, why would you apply the same logic of Ronin's fate being open-ended, which sure, yeah, I think that was okay. If it was Ronin showing up at the end and he didn't have his character arc, then yeah, maybe you could leave that open-ended. Sure, maybe he's a friend of the ninja again, maybe he's not. You can't do that with Harumi, because Harumi has arguably done more worse things than any villain in the entire show in terms of the impact she has had on the team, or at least what she's tried to do. She's tried to kill the main characters many times, including Wu in baby form. She is cold-hearted. She has tried to kill them. And that is a very interesting antagonist. It's not an antagonist that is easily redeemable, and it's not an antagonist that you leave up for the audience to interpret their redemption. Could Harumi have been redeemed? Maybe. It would have been really hard. It would have required a whole Zuko alone type episode, like an Avatar, where Harumi's on her own and maybe grappling with who she is as a person and really diving deep into her character. Yeah, maybe she could have been redeemed. I think any character could be redeemed. They certainly did not set it up whatsoever. Not at all. Harumi lashing out against the Overlord is admittedly in character for her. She will lash out against people she believes have done or will do harm to her family and are responsible to her family getting harmed. That is believable. Harumi now being on the ninja side, as Lloyd says, quote, "Don't worry, she's with us." That is not believable to me in the slightest, and I don't think they should have left that up for interpretation. I really do think that if you're gonna have a Harumi redemption arc, you dedicate the screen time to it and you focus on it. And if you look at how the season was paced, I certainly think, that we had room to do even just one episode of Lloyd, even maybe Lloyd and Garmadon encountering Harumi. You know how much interaction Garmadon has with Harumi in the entire season? He looks over at Harumi at one point, says her name, and then he says he always liked her in one episode. That is it. They never interact again. Why? It's right there. You spend 4 episodes of Lloyd wandering around the tunnels with Garmadon, essentially doing nothing, repeating the same lines over and over again about how he doesn't trust him. Why not dedicate some of that screen time to, I don't know, them encountering Harumi and actually having a confrontation in terms of moralities and beliefs? But maybe it's not that kind of show. I don't know. That's all I have to say about Harumi's arc. I don't think I have much left in me to talk more about this. There is more that could be said about Harumi's arc, and I just feel that they have butchered the arcs of what was once one of my favorite Ninjago villains, and before Crystalized, she probably was my favorite. Now, definitely not anymore, because I don't know what her character is anymore. I don't know how she feels. I don't know what her actions mean. I don't know why she disappeared for most of the season and didn't do anything. I just don't know. And maybe that was the intent behind the season, for you just not to know. But it's very, very upsetting to me and very sad that such a good character has been butchered by Crystalized. Speaking of characters that returned from previous seasons and weren't really done justice in Crystalized, let's talk about the Crystal Council. So from the outset, the Crystal Council was a really, really cool idea. Bringing back all of the kind of living villains for a final showdown with the heroes was such a good idea. And sure, while I understand it is an ensemble season, you can't really have every single villain have a very, very close one-to-one with the ninja. I at least was hoping for a little bit more interaction besides what we eventually got. You see, the thing is, the moment that the Overlord came back into play, the villains were essentially written out of the story. And what was really cool, and I thought Crystalized was doing this very well, is they dedicated a lot of episodes in the initial first half of the season to setting up the villains, to reintroducing them. Asphira got the most love in terms of actually having a full-on arc with Wu and the ninja and even siding with them for a time. And then we of course got a scene of Vangelis being recruited, we got Pythor in the prison, we had a whole episode dedicated to the mechanic and him fighting off against the ninja, and it really felt that we were building towards something big. And there was going to be a big confrontation with the villains facing off against the ninja. And then they did attack the monastery. There were some really cool fight scenes, very nice one-takes, and some really interesting characterization for the villains themselves. None of them really had any character arcs, but it was just good to see a lot of them back, and a lot of them back in action. And then the moment that the Overlord comes back, much like Harumi, the Crystal Council villains disappear from the show. In many ways that could have even been considered to be incredibly obvious, they just didn't get the voice actors for most of the episodes. For a lot of the episodes, the ninja are just fighting the Crystal King's army. I think it would have been a lot more interesting if the Crystal King didn't have an army. If his only quote-unquote army were the generals and the villains, and they kind of had to fight as a team of villains against the ninja. That would have been a really cool concept. But instead, the villains just kind of disappear from the story, and the most egregious one to me, or I guess there's a couple of ones, but one of the big ones is Asphira. We talked about this earlier on, but they were basically setting up Asphira to have some sort of arc in terms of realizing that her enemies, who she has for many years now, sworn revenge on and thought were honorless, and thought that they betrayed her and locked her up, actually do have some honor to them, and are willing to help her out in return for her helping them. And that was a really cool way of setting things up. There's a conversation that Lloyd has with the villains when they corner him right when the Crystal King is unveiled. And he says, "Don't you realize that what you're doing, helping the Overlord, is just going to end in your own destruction? And he is not going to discriminate when destroying Ninjago. He is going to come for you as soon as he's done with us." And the villains just kind of laugh and toss it off, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's why we're working for him. So that doesn't happen, you dummy." And I was like, okay, maybe they're planting the seeds for villains to actually realize that what they're doing might not be right. And sure, a lot of them have different motivations. Asphira wants revenge. Vangelis is greedy, and I guess he also wants revenge against the ninja. Pythor wants, I guess, revenge. I guess all of them want revenge, so to speak. But how far are each of them willing to go for revenge? Does it involve the destruction of all of Ninjago? If Ninjago is destroyed, Vangelis won't have a kingdom to rule or take over. If Ninjago is destroyed, Pythor won't have any other serpentine to command or be king of the snakes. If Ninjago is destroyed, Asphira will never have her old army of Pyro Vipers back. There's a lot of repercussions with the entire world being destroyed, and for it to be enveloped in darkness that would have been interesting for the villains to contemplate. And I hate to keep coming back to it, but Skybound did a very, very good job of setting this up, where every single one of the side villains in Nautocon's crew were their own villains. They were not kind of taken over by some army in terms of screen time, because they were the main villains. They were the army. And every single time the ninja fought anything, it had to be them, which essentially forced the writers to give each of them very unique and interesting character traits and motivations, eventually all leading to one and all of them turning against Nautocon and turning against their kind of main villain who was commanding them. And it was a really good slow burn, because throughout the season you could see little bits of doubt forming in their minds, and some more than others. There were certain members like Flintlock who was more doubtful from the start. Clancy was very doubtful but didn't want to do anything against it. Dogshank felt like she should have been there because of a loyalty to Nautocon, but soon realized that he didn't share that same loyalty to her. Everyone had their own reasons and motivations, which eventually culminated in them turning against Nautocon. I thought they could have done something really cool like that for this particular season. It would have been so interesting to actually see the villains decide to turn against the Overlord and maybe even help the ninja in the final fight. Oh, of course, after giving them individual fight scenes with the ninja, you definitely need to have that. Cool individual fight scenes, but maybe even having a change of heart and Asphira potentially being the one to help out Lloyd in return. But then, the villains, again, do not do anything. They do not do a single thing. Throughout, once the Overlord is resurrected, it is almost like all other plot lines grind to a halt. And here's the thing, each of these characters got so much focus in their own seasons. They all have a reason to have a personal vendetta against the ninja. Pythor has his rivalry with Lloyd. They have a lot of reasons to have good one-on-one scenes against each other. Vangelis has a big rivalry with Cole. Each of the villains are set up to actually have meaningful character interactions with the ninja, but then they just don't. The only time the council actually interacts with the main ninja is in the second to last episode. I guess in a couple times in the third to last where they were just invading near the end of the episode, but they really only have conversations during fights in the second to last episode. Mind you, this is also the only time the villains actually said or did anything notable. Sure, there was one short conversation with Pythor, Kai, and Cole kind of halfway through the season where he was just kind of attacking them and they were defending against him. There was a short conversation with the mechanic and Jay and Nia throughout the season, and that is literally it. There were no other interactions with the villains, and they just disappeared, and it was just bizarre. Every time I was watching, I kept on wondering, where are the villains? What are they doing? What is the Council of the Crystal King doing? They keep saying they're looking around the city for the ninja. Okay, show us them finding the ninja, having fights, getting defeated, I don't know. Have some character interactions here. You're gonna bring back villains to actually have them interact with the characters and to maybe progress them as characters. I know you can't give screen time to all of them because there's a lot, but presumably you want them back for just more than fan service, but essentially this is what it feels like. They're just back for fan service, and the worst thing is, it's not even fan service because they didn't even have meaningful interactions with the ninja. They didn't even have meaningful fight scenes until the second to last episode, upon which they were dispatched very, very easily. So then I ask again, what was the point in bringing the villains back? Did they just want to sell more sets? Did they just want to sell more minifigures? They want kids to say, oh, I missed out on getting a Sphera, let me get her again here. I missed out on getting Vangelis. Or I want Pythor again. Which is cool and all, to have the old villains come back. It's such a cool concept. Certainly handled a lot better than Day of the Departed, but just feels like, again, there's so much wasted potential here in the possibility of bringing back these old characters and just not having them do anything, and worst of all, disappear from the story. Not even have their voice actors in episodes, have them be completely silent for even some of the episodes that they physically appear in, and that was a really, really big disappointment to me. I could keep going on about how the Crystal Council could have had much more interesting arcs. The main one, I think, is Pythor and Sphera. Pythor really could have had a lot of personal stuff with Lloyd. Sphera could have had her own interaction with Lloyd and maybe choose to go against the Overlord. And there was a chance for these villains to revolt against the Overlord because his goals and wishes are not aligned with what they want. But then they just didn't do that, and again, we circle back to having wasted potential. But with the council kind of discussion summed up, I think it's time we get into what is one of our final categories, and that is the character arcs for the ninja, or the lack thereof, for Ninjago Crystalized. Let's talk about the ninja. Kai, Jay, Zane, Cole, because Lloyd and Nia we've already talked about their arcs earlier in this video. One of the coolest things Ninjago did in its early seasons was giving each and every one of the character an arc. This was most prominently used in Season 1, where there were entire episodes dedicated to each one of the ninja overcoming a personal struggle within themselves, giving them some of the base characterization we have seen with them that remains to this day, and having us learn a lot more about our characters that we now have known to grow and love. Now, in terms of giving the characters individual arcs, that has kind of fallen off in recent years. Sometimes they will do stuff like a focus season, where one ninja gets all the focus and the other ones don't really get to do much other than to act as background fodder. In recent seasons, like Seabound, they kind of tried to solve this problem because there are 6 of them. It is hard to cram in 6 characters worth of good development in a TV show. What they've done is they've actually sidelined a few of them. So after Cole got a ton of development in Season 13, in Season 14 Seabound, he wasn't even there for the main mission along with Kai. They kind of sat that one out, and it was mostly focused on Nia, Zane, PIXAL, and Lloyd, which I thought was a pretty good idea to actually try to just hone the focus down on just a few characters and really only focus on one and just remove some others because the cast is getting way too bloated. So I thought that was a pretty good way of doing things. But then comes Crystalized, and this was very interesting to me, because each ninja starts off with kind of their own arc, but then they never really get resolved throughout the season. The only one that comes close is Zane, and that was not handled very well in terms of the later episodes. So let's take a look at what exactly the ninjas' arcs were. For the first one, I think the obvious one is Jay. Jay, after losing Nia, kind of sank into depression, which was something that makes sense for his character and something I was really interested to see be fully explored. He isolated himself in the lighthouse, he refused to be part of the team and a ninja again, and he basically just kind of was just going crazy, talking to cups of water, thinking he was talking to Nia, and that was what he was doing. And Jay was kind of set up to have a pretty interesting character arc throughout the season because it is showing how he deals with loss, and he even has a fight with Kai that gets physical near the end of the first few episodes where he really doesn't think that Nia's being able to be brought back, and they have a disagreement and they start to fight, and then the moment that Nia is brought back, Jay gets her back, and he's just done in terms of development. I don't think after that Jay had an arc. I also don't know if that is an arc, because he was quite upset that Nia was gone. He was so upset that he was ready to leave the team even after coming back and get into a physical fight with Kai, and then he just is okay because she's back, and we never talk about it again. And that was kind of one of the victims of having these truncated episodes. You don't really have enough time to spend on each character, because I could not tell you what Jay's character arc was throughout the season. He essentially, like most of the other ninja, became an action figure. You get to see him in his cool motorcycle, you get to see him defeat enemies, use his dragon form. But what is he thinking? What is he doing? Why is he doing these things? We don't really know. He essentially just becomes an action figure, another piece on the board. And that is a big issue with the season, is that was kind of what happened throughout the rest of it. One thing they tried to do for the final few episodes of the season was to give each ninja, or each grouping of ninja, a focus episode. So for instance, they paired Jay up with Nia. They actually split up the ninja, which I thought was a brilliant idea. When it first happened, all the ninja got split up. There was a big attack. I thought that was so good, because I was saying, okay, we're finally going to get some character development for each of them and kind of get a look inside what they're thinking and how they're feeling throughout this invasion. But then Jay and Nia don't really do anything. Their entire mission is to go to the dock so Nia can maybe send a signal out to the Merlopians to have them save them. The signal is sent, and then they go back. And there wasn't really anything for them to overcome. Nia realizes that her powers are coming back, but not as much as she wants them to, so nothing really grew with her there, and Jay was just kind of there. He didn't want to lose Nia again, but he didn't really grow or do anything of his own, which is not necessarily a major problem. At least they didn't give him a bad character arc like I would say they did with Lloyd, Harumi, and Nia, but he just didn't really have one. And the same definitely goes for Kai and Cole. Going into the season, we had them kind of starting off as what could have been a very interesting starting off point, but they didn't really do much with it. For instance, Kai having lost his sister would definitely give a major impact on his personality and impact what he does. And he chose to leave the team and set up his own ninja school, where he was training kids to be ruthless and defeat their enemies before they have a chance to strike back and hurt one of their own. That's a pretty cool idea for Kai to not hold back and to really think that he needs to completely obliterate his enemies just to prevent a tragedy like this from happening ever again with the loss of his sister. I kind of wish they kept that throughout the entire season because, of course, in a matter of 3 episodes, Nia comes back and says, hey, you can save me, this is what you gotta do, I remember who I am, and then Kai's just fine. I don't think he had any other character development. There's a weird moment, I don't even know if this is a funny moment, there's a weird moment in one of the later episodes where he's having a conversation with Skylar, he tries to ask her out, and she basically says, no, you disappeared and didn't communicate with me for years, and I never heard from you, I didn't know if you were okay, and he's just kind of like, oh yeah, sorry, there was a lot of stuff going on, but I'm here now, and she said, okay, well let's get through this, and then we'll talk about what we are. And I was like, okay, they're probably gonna resolve that, but no. That was also one of the ones where Tommy said specifically, they said, oh, we wanted to leave it up for people to decide. Did they end up together? Did they not? You decide. It's a choose your own adventure type thing. But because of this insistence on letting the audience decide the endings of these character arcs and these character points, we don't have character arcs. There is no growth. There is no learning. There is nothing because they have specifically designed it such that there is nothing so that there aren't any character arcs whatsoever because they want you to decide. Which, okay, they can do it for a couple. Like, I didn't really need to know if Kai ended up with Skylar. I honestly don't really care. Sure, maybe they do, maybe they don't. That doesn't really matter to me. This is one where I'm kind of more okay with it being left open. But when they keep on doing this, when they keep on leaving literally everybody's character arcs open, then it starts to build up and get frustrating, where smaller issues like this, where previously I probably wouldn't have even cared, then tend to feel like bigger problems. The same kind of goes for Cole. I could not tell you what Cole's character arc was in this season, much like I could not tell you what Kai's or Jay's was, if they had one. Cole started off as someone who had to take on a lot of responsibility. With Lloyd leaving the ninja team and becoming a window washer, he had to step up and retake his role as leader of the team, or whatever team was left. And We actually saw a lot of this in the comics. Like, it was really interesting. They put out some tie-in comics, which are non-canon, but the writers actually played around with this because they were forced to make stories in the time with the ninja dealing with Nia's disappearance. So they had Lloyd increasingly doubting his own role as the leader, realizing that Cole was stepping up, and eventually deciding to leave the team because Cole got it handled. That's a cool concept. That is a really interesting thing to explore. And sure, they had only a few different kids' comic magazine strips to spend it on, but that was an interesting way of doing things. But then Lloyd comes back, and Cole's turn as leader is not mentioned again. They do not make reference to it. It is not mentioned that he picked up the slack after Lloyd is gone. It is almost like it didn't happen, and we're back to, you guessed it, a healthy status quo, which, in my opinion, is now Ninjago's biggest villain. Forget the Overlord, forget Nauticon. A healthy status quo is the biggest villain of the show, because the insistence on keeping a healthy status quo means that your characters can't change, they can't grow, they can't go through arcs. Cole does nothing throughout the season. He gets knocked out for a little bit. He's kind of in a concussion, I guess, for a little bit. He doesn't really know what's going on, and I am struggling to come up with anything else that he did. He was brought over to the news tower to call help with the people in the Shintaro city. So, okay, that's something he did. That's not a character beat or a character moment for him. That is an action he did. And then he just fights the villains and they're okay. So, I ask again, what was Cole's character arc? And again, you don't need every single ninja to have a character arc. I think we were definitely spoiled in the early seasons when we did have character arcs for all the ninja. But it feels weird how there's just nothing for any of them, given how long the season was, and given that they did try. They tried to split the ninja up, they tried to put them on their own and show how they'd react to things, but when they were on their own, they just kind of fought the villains and didn't really do anything, and that was a really big problem for me. The ninja who came closest to actually having a character arc, and I say this in the loosest of possible terms, because it is less of an arc and more of a few disjointed events, but the character that did come the close to actually having some sort of an arc is Zane. Zane, as I mentioned before, starts off the story in a very, very interesting place. He has accepted that turning off his emotions is his greatest fear, and he is an emotionless robot now, but he is willing to do it because he doesn't want to feel grief. And throughout the first 6 episodes, he is grappling with this, and there isn't really a lot of focus on it, and in the prison arc, he turns his emotions back on, starts freaking out, turns them off again, and he's like back to normal, and they are kind of questioning, why are your emotions always off? And he says, I don't know, I've gotten used to having them be off, and I don't know why I would want to feel sad. And this obviously ties back into his original Season 1 character arc, where Zane has never really gotten the chance to experience grief before. Just as he was about to experience it with his father, Dr. Julian, dying, his father turned off his memory, essentially turning off his emotions for him so he wouldn't have to go through the pain. And a lot of the same stuff keeps happening to him. So Zane is continuously never having to face grief and never having to face sadness. And that is such an interesting character arc to bring for one of the characters whose greatest fear is being emotionless. There is so much you could do there, and guess what? Here's the kicker. The Ice Emperor, something that people have been begging for Ninjago to address in Zane's writing, was the result of him having no memories and no emotions. This was the perfect time to bring that in, and clearly they wanted to bring it in. Tommy specifically stated in his interview he wanted them to have a Zane PTSD arc. He wanted him to deal with what he had done as the Ice Emperor. But for some reason the writers wanted there to be more comedy, and so they brought back the Ice Emperor and essentially treated it as an absolute joke. Instead of being a menacing ruler that he was in Season 11, where you really got a sense of danger for him, he was just a cartoonish king villain. Like, he was just a cartoonish emperor. He was ordering people around, saying cast him in the dungeons and calling for Vex, and it really was just the whole reason why that Ice Emperor persona even came up was not because he turned his emotions off, not because he lost his memory, or had to grapple with losing his emotions. It's because he hit his head, and he got confused, and he thought he was the Ice Emperor. That was it. And then he was in a coma for most of the rest of the episodes until PIXAL brings him back in an admittedly very touching scene. PIXAL probably had the best arc out of all the characters this season, and that's saying something, because PIXAL usually has literally less than nothing to do. All of the other characters felt like Pixels in this season, where they're just kind of there, they're action figures, they're there, they don't do anything, they fight, they do some cool stuff. Some episodes don't even have them, especially Nia. Nia felt like Pixel 2 in this season, and Pixel actually had stuff to do, so I do really like that. But oh my goodness, Zane just had so much wasted potential in terms of the character arc he could have had. The Benefit of Grief, which a lot of people give flack to because they say the character of Sally is annoying and they don't like the song, I think was the best episode in terms of giving us character development in the entire season, because it actually made Zane change. It made him change from somebody who thought emotions were bad and negative emotions were bad and wanted to suppress them, to somebody who realized the benefit of grief. And that was wonderful. That was really cool. Again, that's why I mean that he actually did have somewhat of an arc this season. It's just a shame that after that episode, it's never mentioned again. And again, as soon as that episode's over, he just becomes another action figure. You get to play with his jet. You get to see his jet swooping around and blasting the Overlord. And he doesn't do anything. Also, there is no acknowledgement or confrontation that Zane was the one who defeated the Overlord in Rebooted. It's not that big of a deal, I guess, because, I don't know, you can excuse it by the Overlord just really only cares about Lloyd, and sure, he was defeated once by Zane. But it is odd to have them not acknowledge each other once and not even have a conversation. In fact, none of the ninja have a conversation with the Overlord whatsoever. Only Lloyd does when he goes up there. Huh. Very, very, very odd. Overall, though, I think Zane was the best in terms of characterization this season, although it's not saying much because his character development basically ended after the Benefit of Grief episode, and everything else after that, he was but just like the other ninja, where it was just kind of an action figure. You're there to sell toys and do nothing more and not grow and not change and maintain the healthy status quo. Overall, though, I think that the character arcs for the ninja were pretty non-existent, and that brings us to PIXAL, because PIXAL actually had a good arc, and this is something positive I will say about the arcs here. I really did like what they did with PIXAL this season. PIXAL has always been a character that hasn't really had a lot to do, and she's felt a lot like background noise, and it feels like we're in a bit of a rut with PIXAL. Because here's the thing with PIXAL. I hate to be harsh, but PIXAL is kind of dead weight for a lot of the seasons she appears in. She's there in the background, she doesn't assist the ninja in what they do, despite there being never really a good reason as to why she doesn't, other than she's not part of the main team technically. She is just kind of in the background, and even less important than Wu. There are whole seasons that come by where we don't even see her at all, where maybe we'll see her for one episode, and that's it. Maybe at the beginning and at the very end. And PIXAL is definitely a character that I feel is very underutilized, because they really did set her up to have an interesting turn as Samurai X, and then she didn't really do anything with that. But then this season, they actually gave her stuff to do. They had PIXAL create her own army of mini-Pix robots, which are of course a fan favorite from the season. I love the mini-Pix, best part of the season. They had her have some cool fight scenes in the end. She had her own combo mech, which was the ninja combo mech. And most of all, I think, what was probably one of the best episodes in the second half of the season, at least because of, I guess, half of it, was PIXAL and her conversation with Zane when he was in a coma lying on the table in Borg's office. This was the episode titled Compatible, and we were very excited for this because it came right after Return to the Ice Emperor, and everyone was speculating that PIXAL would be the one to maybe bring Zane back from the Ice Emperor persona. It wasn't anything really like that, but she has a really good speech in terms of talking about how she was changed by Zane, and when he gave her part of his core, she felt love, and she felt fear and anger and emotions, things she had never felt before, and she didn't even know if there was anything for them after death, if there's anything they would face after death, if they have souls, but she knows that if there is, she will find him there. That is a really touching speech. That was delivered wonderfully by Jennifer Hayward, the voice actress. I loved the way that was handled, and sure, Zane awakening from his coma right at that moment is a little cheesy, but you know what? That was more character development for any character we had gotten in a while, and at that point in the season, I was just desperate for something to happen other than just action, 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 action figures, fight, 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 and that was a real emotional beat that we hadn't seen in so long that I was desperate. I was desperate for anything. I'm sure that moment is definitely looking a lot better than it actually is in retrospect now, because I'm going through it, and that is basically the only emotional moment that anybody had throughout the entire second half, for the most part, and that was handled pretty well. I'm pretty happy with how that was done. Damaging Zane was a pretty good idea to get that done and get that character arc out, and I am really a big fan of how they handled PIXAL's arc. So PIXAL, you get a thumbs up. That was great. A very shocking one. It was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. That out of all the ninja, PIXAL had the best character arc, because I don't think the showrunners even consider her to be one of the ninja. When Tommy was asked about why PIXAL doesn't do more stuff, he literally said on Twitter he doesn't think she's as cool as a ninja, and kids like ninjas more than a random robot samurai, which shows the amount of respect that PIXAL gets from the writing crew here. So actually having her have good character moments and character beats was very, very nice. So big fan of how they handled that. So that's a good note. That's a good positive note to end this on. And the last thing I wanted to talk about here is the Overlord and the theory of balance. And we could get a lot into this. TTV themselves, the Three Virtues, have done a lot of podcasts on it, and Sakota over there, who is known in the Bionicle community for a lot of other reasons, really good reasons, has really done a deep dive into balance and what that means for Ninjago and what everything is tying to that. And I don't want to say stuff that's already been said. I think he has said it much better than I could, so I'll make this quick. Bringing back the Overlord for Ninjago's final season is something that makes sense. You would want to bring back the greatest villain Ninjago has ever faced, especially because technically the prophecy of the Green Ninja was never fulfilled. It stated that Lloyd would defeat the ultimate Dark Lord, and it was actually Zane who defeated the Overlord once and for all, or so it seemed. But here's the thing that really bugs me, because it is stated that the Overlord will always return, as long as there is conflict and strife in the world. As long as there is imbalance, the Overlord will return. Nothing you can do can defeat him. And here's the thing. This is what set up the season to be very interesting. Both sides want the same thing. The Overlord wants there to be peace in the dark. He does not want there to be fights anymore. He doesn't want there to be good guys fighting him. He just wants there to be peace in the dark, whatever that means. The good guys, on the other hand, the ninja, also want there to be peace. They want the Overlord to be eradicated entirely. They want to remove darkness from the world of Ninjago. They want to prevent conflict from ever happening again. But that is a much more difficult moral and ideological battle that you can find, because as long as people have free will, as long as people are human, surely there will be conflict. People naturally conflict with each other. I understand that this isn't something like Westworld Season 1. This isn't a show about morality, really. This is not the show to dive deep into the morality of what is good, what is evil, what does it mean for there to be conflict and balance. But when you set up your entire conflict and explicitly say that the Overlord thrives on conflict, and as long as there is a fight between light and dark, so in some cases, as long as there is a balance, the Overlord will exist and will come back and will attack Ninjago again. You kind of write yourself into a corner there, because then you're like, okay, well, how are the heroes going to end this threat? The Overlord wants the same thing as the ninja. They both want there to be no more fighting. The Overlord wants to win, they want to win, and they never want to fight again. How are you going to beat that? And the answer is, you don't? You don't even address it, is what they did. I am totally fine with the answer being you don't. I think that is a really interesting dichotomy, where they would be like, hey, we defeated the Overlord for now, but conflict will always exist. We always have to be ready for him to come back. I think if they said that, that would be good. But the way it was portrayed was that the Overlord is gone forever. He is completely eradicated. There is no more darkness. The Oni Temple, the Temple of Darkness, explodes. And that is something that does not quite sit right with me with the established lore they've made for the show. If you go back, and I know this is pretty obscure, but if you go back to the Dark Island trilogy comics, Klaus comes back and he tries to destroy the Temple of Light on the Dark Island. And they say, oh, that's going to mess up the balance. If the balance is disrupted, the entire realm will fall apart, things will explode, the entire city will be racked by earthquakes, very, very bad stuff will happen. You need to have balance. You need to have a Temple of Light on the Island of Darkness, and you need to have a Temple of Darkness on the Island of Light, or Ninjago. But then they just blow it up. Or it just blows up. I don't even think they blew it up. And the Overlord is seemingly killed for good. Or at the very least, they treat it like it. They all celebrate as if the Overlord has been beaten for good. So I question what exactly has been accomplished here. The Overlord may return. Next year, he could return tomorrow. He could return in 10 years, 100 years. He will return. Status quo, again, has not changed. The Overlord can always come back. And that I'm wondering, what is the point of writing into the season the fact that the Overlord thrives on conflict and will always come back if there is conflict, if you're not actually going to do something to change that, or at the very least do something to address it? It seems to me that they came up with that reason only to just kind of justify why the Overlord was back. And they didn't really want to think too much hard about it. They were like, oh, you know what, he's back. Why is he back? Oh, maybe he never can be defeated. Maybe he thrives on destruction, so he'll always return. Okay, that's why he's back, but what are you going to do to deal with that now? The ninja are not going to be around forever, and maybe they train a new generation. Maybe the new show in 10 years from now will be about them fighting the Overlord, but it feels to me that they really set it up for a very interesting moral dichotomy here. Again, this might not be that kind of show, and it probably isn't that kind of show. It's not the time or place to go into a moral dilemma and a moral argument and a psychological and philosophical argument about conflict and the balance and light and dark and good and evil. But if the point of the show, or at least what they're trying to do, this season in particular, is to show that not everything is black and white, not everything is good and evil, especially with Lloyd's character arc, then it just feels like a lot of wasted potential in terms of the balance. And considering the Overlord and how he factors into all of this, it just feels that they brought him back to do some fights, to get blown up by a big gold dragon that you can go out and buy for $150 US, and that's it. And he'll be back. He'll probably be back. Actually, we know he'll be back. They have said he will be back. There was nothing that Lloyd or the others did that convinces me that he doesn't. And they could have solved this very, very easily. And this is where we get into the changes that I would make. As I said in the beginning, I want to preface these few sections, or I guess these 3 upcoming sections, with I am not a professional writer. I do not write stories for kids. That is handled by professionals who are much, much more skilled than me and know what they are doing. Tommy and Braggy are professionals. They know what they are doing. All the writers on Ninjago are professional writers. They know what they're doing, and I am not saying that my ideas are better than theirs. I am not saying that my ideas should have been what has happened. I am not trying to force my headcanon onto the show. I just think there are a couple things that maybe they didn't consider, and maybe certain things could have been improved if a few minor tweaks are made, and then a few somewhat minor tweaks, and a few major tweaks, and then we get to big rewrites. And these, again, are just my opinions for the show, and they absolutely should not be treated as me saying they should absolutely have done this. I'm sure that if given a little bit more thought, they could have come up with something way better than these. Tommy's original ideas for Crystalized, there were 2 big ideas he had. The one, which I discussed earlier when we were talking about Tommy's Q&A, which was Lloyd, everything playing out the same, but Lloyd eventually being overwhelmed by darkness, taking the throne, and his friends having to bring him back to the light. That's a really good idea. I would have loved that. That would have solved a lot of my issues with Lloyd's character arc, which was my biggest problem with the season. The other idea they had, which was using Nia as a vessel to bring the 2 islands together, bring dark matter together. I don't know, maybe that would have been interesting. I would have loved to hear more about how that would have affected Nia's character arc and how the other character arcs would have played out, but I don't know, that could have worked. Those are all good ideas. I also have some ideas that I would probably find to be interesting, and if they had done these, I feel like there are a lot of things that honestly felt common sense and almost felt like they were leading to, but for whatever reason they didn't do. So let's get started. The first section here is on minor rewrites. I am keeping everything the same, except for the final 2 episodes, Dragon Form and Roots. And really, basically Dragon Form, only the last few minutes are changing. Like, the last couple of seconds are changing, not even that much. Really only the Roots would change, is what I would say. So here's what I think should have been done in terms of improving some of the problems. As a recap of the problems that we discussed, you have Lloyd's arc, Nia's arc, Harumi's arc, the Crystal Council, the Ninja arcs, and the Overlord. This will solve a lot of the problems. It will solve Lloyd's arc, it will hopefully solve Nia's arc, it will help Harumi's arc. There's not a lot you can do given that she didn't really appear in the other episodes, and we're not changing anything from the other ones, so it would help give a little bit of closure, I think. The Crystal Council, I don't know. I don't think it would change much. At this point in the game, it's so late, you only have 10 minutes of screen time per episode. Their fate is sealed. I don't think it would have changed that. I also don't think it would have changed any of the ninja arcs, because again, this is too late in the game. And I don't think it would have changed the whole issue with the Overlord getting defeated and balanced. It might have, maybe. Maybe there's a few things they could have written in. But the main thing it fixes is Lloyd's arc, Nia's arc, not even Nia's entire arc, the ending of Nia's arc, and some stuff with Harumi. So it's not a perfect fix, but it's a fix they could have done if they only could change the last 2 episodes. So, starting off in Dragon Form, I talked through this a little bit, but Nia's big moment is knocking over a pipe, defeating the mechanic temporarily before he regains powers and starts to attack her until she's saved by Okino. Here's what I would change. It is very easy. Don't have her knock him over with a pipe. Instead, I don't know, make her knock the pipe over and have a massive burst of water come out and wash over the mechanic, completely defeat him, defeat the legions, maybe even have her save Okino, or save someone else. And especially if she maybe saves a kid there, show them that they're grateful, show them that Nia's their hero, not because she's the water ninja, but because she is her, and she is a role model. Okay, that solves my big complaint with Nia's arc. That's a very quick change they could have made. Even the same exact screen time, just remove the part about her being saved by Okino and saved by Jay. Just have the moment be completely hers. That's it. That's all I would change about Dragon Form. That is it. That is the only thing. The other thing, we get to Roots. This is the big one. So the thing is here that at the beginning of the episode, Lloyd taps into his Oni form, and he believes that Garmadon has died, and personally I would have killed Garmadon to make it have more stakes, but you know, it doesn't really matter. If you don't want to kill anyone, sure, fine. Make Garmadon fake his death to bring out his Oni form, whatever. It doesn't bother me too much. It doesn't bother me as much as it does a lot of the other things do. What I think should have been done is, you could have kept it exactly the same. Just change one thing. Change the character model of Lloyd riding his dragon to his two-armed Oni form with green eyes from the sets, and add in a couple lines of dialogue, where all he says is something along these lines. I realize that balance is about accepting the good and evil within me. Tapping too much into evil makes me become just like you, and just like the worst parts of my father. But being just pure good will never defeat you, because you'll always come back. The only way to truly defeat you, Overlord, or something like that, is to embrace the balance, and to use both powers of Oni and Dragon in unison to defeat you. He doesn't even need to verbally say that, it could just be obvious. Like, they don't even need to spell it out. I would have been totally fine if they just throw his Oni mask on him, on the animation form, and have him be riding the dragon while wearing his Oni mask and color his eyes green. Recoloring the eyes of an animated 3D object is easy. Just do that, and that solves 3 things at once, or at least 2 big things at once. It solves Lloyd's arc. Again, Lloyd's arc the entire season has been, he's been wanting to get out of the shadow of his father, and he believes that if you're an Oni, you're evil, and there's no ends if or buts. If he has judged you to be evil, if he thinks you are made to be evil, you are evil. You cannot change. People do not change. And there is no good in negative things. There's no good in negative emotions. Now, we got episodes called The Benefit of Grief before. Zane went through this arc, Zane understands the benefit of grief, and Zane understands the benefit of negative emotions. But does Lloyd? Apparently not, because he thinks that being in an Oni form is a mistake. In the actual episodes, he rejects it. Even Garmadon says, oh, you didn't even give it a chance, you were scared of your own reflection. And Lloyd responds with, I didn't even need Oni form to beat him. Which, again, I'm just getting frustrated here. What's the message we're sending here? Is the message we're sending, if you judge someone to be bad, or have a preconceived notion that is negative about them, then they must be bad? Or Lloyd was right? Because that's not a good message. A good message is accepting that inside everyone there is good and bad, and inside everyone there is balance. And making that the key to defeating the big bad guy is a really cool way to teach a lesson and have a character grow and change and evolve as their character arc in the season at the same time. And that's it. It's just that. I would literally only change that, and that would be how I would end Crystalized. If they just changed those 2 things, even Nia, like, if you could only change one episode, only change one thing, put the Oni mask on Lloyd. That's it. Don't explain it. You don't even need to explain it. Put the Oni mask on him while he's riding the dragon, show that he is in somewhat of an Oni form, but it's using both Oni and dragon to defeat the Overlord. That's it. That solves 99% of the problems with Lloyd's character arc. And that is, those are my minor rewrites. Super, super small. I genuinely think this would have solved most of the issues and leave people with a much happier feeling about character arcs and development in the season. Now, there's also a couple things you could have done with Harumi. You, I don't know, could have made her actually apologize for what she did. You could have just not shown her at the end in the monastery. Shown her being locked away. Shown her being remorseful. I think what would have been perfect is that Harumi should have been the one to sacrifice herself. Take out the whole aspect of Harumi ever having feelings for Lloyd, or maybe leave him in. Again, we're not changing the earlier episodes, but she hears that the Overlord is responsible for her parents' death. She goes in, she's no match for the Overlord. The Overlord just kills her. Like, she gets in some good blows, and she is just done. Maybe she's thrown off the side of the thing, maybe she's crushed under rocks. You could do it in a PG way. Like, you killed her before by having her collapse underneath a building. You could do a similar type of death like that by having rubble fall on her and killing her for good. If you killed Harumi like that, that is a much better ending to her arc than having her stay around and be a maybe ally to the ninja. That is a lot less problematic. Harumi has a pretty toxic relationship with Lloyd. I don't even know if I would call it a relationship. They're basically enemies. She's tried to kill him many times, and a redemption doesn't make sense. If you just have her die there, you have her death mirror her original death in Hunted, where she doesn't die having been absolved of her sins, she doesn't die becoming a good guy, she dies because she wants to stick with what she believes, and what she believes in the moment is that she needs to get revenge against the Overlord, and that lets her die as a conflicted character, it lets her die as a important, interesting, two-dimensional character, and it also lets people let their own conclusions be drawn. Was she attacking the Overlord just purely out of revenge? Did she switch sides? You decide. And they could have had that same dichotomy and just having her die there. But leaving her around raises too many questions in terms of how are the ninja going to treat her? Is she a hero now? Is she just on probation? Can she get redeemed and work off her crimes? We don't know, and neither does Lego, because the writers do not know. So that's how it is with Harumi, only a few minor things. And then we move into the next section, with rewrites within constraints. Again, to remind us, our constraints are Nia needs to come back, we need to have Harumi brought back, we need to bring back some old villains, and all the sets exist. So, the few small rewrites I would make within constraints is, actually there's one major one, is that I think that a really interesting way to present the Overlord's plan and to really bring Harumi onto its side and honestly make us believe a little bit in why she would think this, is that Harumi is tired. Harumi is tired of fighting, she is tired of trying to save Ninjago and trying to fight back against the so-called heroes who she doesn't believe in and think are not good protectors of the realm. And the Overlord comes along, he resurrects her the same way, and he says, look, I've found a way to change dark matter, where instead of just corrupting people and turning them into mindless zombies, it makes them happy, and it makes them docile, and it just makes them simple-minded, or maybe makes them live out their lives in peace, but they don't have free will. And Ninjago will not progress, people will not learn, people will not grow, people will, oh boy, you guessed it, maintain the status quo of whatever they are, and never grow and never change. Maybe I'm projecting here by making that the villain's plan, because I feel like that is Ninjago's greatest villain, which is forcing things to never change. But I also think it would have been a really interesting moral dilemma for Harumi to say, yeah, I believe in that. I'm so tired of conflict, I'm so tired of fighting, and I think people should just be docile and be happy with what they have, and to never revolt again. And so maybe it like brainwashes people. Maybe when the Overlord sends his armies in and they shoot them with crystals, the crystals like kind of grow on their heads or something, and they just start to smile, and they go about their lives ignorant of any pain or hardship around them. And when things die, they don't care. When pain happens, nothing really affects them. And that could be a really interesting dilemma for Harumi to say, hey, yeah, I think that this is how things should be. I don't want there to be other people like me. She specifically went out trying to prevent another child from being like her, and this is a way to prevent that, by just removing all conflict from Ninjago and removing free will. And then that gives a pretty interesting dilemma, where the heroes are like, well yeah, but removing free will is bad, and even though this world isn't perfect, its imperfections make the world human, and make the world real, and make the world worth living. Oh, but wait, Lego Monkey Kid already did this. I don't know how many here watch Lego Monkey Kid, but the villain in Lego Monkey Kid is trying to make the world perfect, and by making the world perfect, it just freezes everything in place, and everyone is happy and content in their lives, and nobody ever has to fight again, and there's no conflict. And the ending theme of Monkey Kid Season 3 is, this world isn't perfect, but I embrace the imperfections in the world, and it's the imperfections are what I want to fight for, because that's what makes us human, that's what makes life worth living, is conflict sometimes, and imperfections and negative emotions. So, okay, Monkey Kid already did this. I kind of just came to this realization myself, and it's kind of funny how the other LEGO property treated it much more seriously and had a much more interesting moral dilemma than Ninjago, which typically is what I would expect to have stuff like this, but just didn't. And I feel like having a similar thing for Ninjago would have been really cool. That being said, maybe this was the original plan, and maybe they changed it, because we actually know from Tommy's interview, the original main villains for Crystalized were going to be spiders. After Harumi's spider song, she was going to be like a spider cyborg, and the entire motif was going to be spiders until they realized that Monkey Kid was doing a Spider Queen arc, which may I add was also done really well. Monkey Kid is actually a pretty good show in retrospect. You all should watch it if you can. Anyways, Monkey Kid was already doing that, so they had to change things somewhat last minute and come up with the crystals, which explains a lot, because the crystals were never explained. We don't know what the crystals are or where they came from. And when I asked the designers and I asked Tommy, all they said were, I don't know, it looks cool. Which, sure, I guess there's a lot of stuff in Ninjago where people don't know why they're there, they just look cool. But that's what the crystals are. The other things I would change, if we had to work within the constraints or bring Nia back, is just give her a little bit more screen time throughout the episodes. Make her grapple with the potential of being human. I talked a lot about this in the Nia arc section. I'm not going to repeat myself. Just make her grapple with the possibility of what it means to be just human, and how you can be special by being just someone by yourself and being who you are, and not because of any powers. And then finally, just if you have to give her powers back, give him back in a more spectacular fashion so it feels that she is a real powerful character and she's earned it. Don't make some other guy save her. But I think what would have been really cool is if she just never got her powers back. Just don't give her powers back whatsoever. Let her be powerless the entire season. It really does have lasting repercussions on her. And in the final few episodes, she saves people and she is the hero despite not having powers. And the next thing, the Crystal Council. That's an interesting one. Given that we had to have them around and had to have them back, we already have a great setup for Asphira turning against the Overlord, or at least having some sort of camaraderie with Lloyd, who let her go. Just have them revolt. Have the Crystal Council turn against the Crystal King in the last few episodes and say, hey, we're not on board with this, we didn't sign up for this, let's fight with the ninja. And have a big final fight with everyone, literally everyone, against the Crystal Army. I think that would have been really interesting to see the villains grapple with having to work with the people who jailed them or who took everything away from them. And it would have been interesting to see them not even get redeemed, but just stand against a united foe. And I definitely thought that was what they were building towards by making Asphira somewhat sympathetic. They also made Harumi obviously very sympathetic in the way that she was acting. I thought they were all building towards them revolting, but no. They would just kind of get defeated. I don't even think one of them even has lines in the final episode, and that's it. So definitely would have changed that. And that's about it. That is really the only major thing. It would have been very nice to have Zane actually have repercussions in his arc and go through the Ice Emperor thing, but I guess it was a constraint from the writers that they wanted to keep things funny, so we'll talk about that in the big rewrites. And with that, we come to the big rewrite section. If I were to rewrite this from scratch, what were some of the things we would have done or big changes I would have made? The big one is, this may be controversial, but I think that what should have been done is switch Zane and PIXAL's positions in the compatible episode and make the Return of the Ice Emperor episode about Zane being distraught about PIXAL being damaged, maybe beyond repair. You don't even need to kill PIXAL. I don't think character deaths automatically equal a story being good. It does make it feel that there are stakes. It does make it feel that things are actually happening that you should care about, but you could put PIXAL in a coma for a lot of the episode and have her wake up in the same way. But I think it would have been 1,000 times more impactful if, picture this, Zane and PIXAL are fighting, and PIXAL is piloting a mech or something, or maybe she's fighting on her own, and she gets overwhelmed, and there's a big explosion, and when Zane finally gets to her, he isn't able to get there on time, and her head falls into his arms, much like Zane's head fell into her arms in that episode, and she's just powered off, and he thinks she's maybe unrepairable, maybe she's dead, maybe she just needs to get to Cyrusborg to be repaired. But Zane completely freaks out, maybe he straps her to his back, she's completely powered off at this point, and he changes his cloak and reimagines the persona of the Ice Emperor. And he says, there's no more mercy, there's no more emotion, I will do whatever it takes. And he's so distraught about it. And he turns off his emotions again and says, there is no benefit, I can't handle this grief again, not so soon after losing Nia. So he becomes the Ice Emperor again, and he's just going crazy. He's attacking the crystallized soldiers. He's really kind of being a major threat, incredibly powerful, blasting his ice everywhere. And then, in a final moment, he's about to attack some civilians. Now, we specifically know that civilians, when corrupted with the crystals, kind of act like mindless zombies, but they should not be harmed. We kind of go through this earlier when they specifically say do not harm the people because they're just people corrupted by crystals. And it could be in that moment that Zane realizes that he is about to strike down civilians who don't know what they're doing, who have been corrupted by crystals. What if it was Sally? What if it was Sally and her parents? Wouldn't that be perfect? Wouldn't that be perfect to tie in the benefit of grief? He comes across Sally and her parents who have been crystallized, and he's about to strike them down. He's striking down everything with crystals on it. And he stops himself because he remembers what she told him about the benefit of grief and how having negative emotions is a positive thing and can actually help you get over things and help you process sadness and process loss. and he switches off the Ice Emperor. He makes the conscious choice to turn off the persona and overcome that. Look at that. That is... You can do that in 10 minutes. That is totally fine. You could even fit in a lot of other stuff in that episode as well. You could even have at the end, they get picked up by the criminals, do the same exact thing, have them be brought to Borg, and that's it. And then, in Compatible, Zane can talk about how meeting PIXAL was what really was able to help him unlock a lot of aspects of his humanity, and she is part of the reason why he was able to understand negative emotions and understand positive emotions and want to come back. And she anchored him while he was still in his Ice Emperor persona, buried away in there. He still remembered that she was there, and she was what anchored him. And then, sure, you can have her wake up and proceed as planned. But I think that very simple switch would have been really, really fantastic in order to have an actual character resolution for Zane. Especially if you're bringing back the Ice Emperor, why not just do it like that? I am a big fan of how that idea sounds, and I don't know, I'm curious to hear in the comments below what folks think about that particular idea for Zane. The other major things I would change are the big rewrites, I guess. Personally, I think that they should have kept Nia dead, or quote-unquote dead. They should have kept her in water form, not brought her back whatsoever. It was a mistake to bring her back. I strongly do believe that. However, that doesn't mean she doesn't need to have a presence throughout the season. The ninja obviously would be dealing with their grief, giving us a lot more interesting character interactions and forcing them to come together to fight, even if not all of them, not all their hearts are in the game. It gives Jay a lot of stuff to do. It gives Kai a lot of stuff to do. It even gives Cole characterization and Lloyd thinking that he failed his team. There's so much stuff you could do with each of the characters here, with Nia being dead, quote-unquote, throughout the season, and maybe she can return. I think she definitely should return in the final fight, where Jay maybe would go down to the beach by himself and really try to reach out to Nia and help her remember who she is. And she could even have the agency herself, because I did like Nia having her own agency to bring herself back. She could go back to Ninjago, so say what's going on, and realize herself that she needs to participate in this fight and help her friends and help Jay. And that's her role. She is still one with the ocean, but she helps to fight against the Overlord. She can have a really cool big fight against the Crystal King, or they could go down the original route that Tommy wanted to do, which was don't bring her back, have Lloyd turn quote-unquote evil or be overwhelmed by Oni power at the end, and then have her fight him. Sure, that works great. That's fantastic. I think that any of these would have been much better than bring her back only for her to do nothing and be a cardboard cutout in the back of the season. And finally, the other major rewrite that I personally would do is, as much as I like Harumi as a character, she had a very, very solid ending, and they would have had to come up with a very good reason for her to be back. I don't think that that reason to find is impossible. I personally just can't think of a very good reason unless you're going to dedicate an entire season to her character development, and her relationship with Lloyd. And we don't have the time for that in this season. If they maybe went away together at the end of Primeval's Eye, and maybe she was their prisoner for a bit and had to work with them and realize what she was doing was wrong, and she was with the ninja for most of the final season, maybe they could have had a good arc for her. But honestly, they're juggling a lot on their plate. So I say, don't bring back Harumi. Replace her with Pythor. Pythor is a really good example here. He fits the bill perfectly. He has a personal rivalry with Lloyd. He has worked with the Overlord before. In Season 3, he helps the Overlord and says he wants a favor in return. And we still don't know what that favor was. Maybe that favor was, hey, whenever you do return, I want to be your right-hand man. I want to be the guy in charge. I want you to give me a position of power. That would be a great way to write Pythor back into the TV show itself, write him back into the season, and make him the buyer orchestrating everything. Tommy said one of the original ideas was that Pythor was the buyer and he was invisible throughout all the other seasons. That's perfect. Why not? He can turn invisible. That is wonderful for his character, and he's a villain. Like, he does not have really any chance of redemption. For the most part, he got redeemed sort of in Tournament of Elements, or less redeemed, but more, he specifically said he was only helping the ninja because he wanted to be the one to take over the world. So that's why he was helping them. That's not even a redemption. You can go so many directions with this character, and the best thing is, it's Pythor. So if you want to focus on the Overlord, if you want to focus on the ninja's arcs, you can just have him take a back seat and it won't matter as much. Kind of like here when they did the Crystal Council, you had Vangelis not appear for 6 episodes or so. I didn't really care. Vangelis is kind of a nothing character, and I'm not saying Pythor is a nothing character, but Pythor is not as important of a character personality-wise as Harumi. Pythor is not somebody who you need to have a redemption arc to make it believable that he would be helping the ninja rebuild the monastery at the very end. Pythor can exist as a funny, charming, kind of special, unique villain, to have a rivalry with Lloyd, to really be taunting him and be reminding him of their past, and be just that, be a fun, goofy, charming villain. And that's what he was in the season. He was a fun, goofy, and charming villain, but they could have just made him the main Vengestone buyer and just gotten rid of Harumi, cut out one plot line, and make the season a lot tighter. And honestly, those are the big rewrites that I would do. And I know this video has been going on for a long time, and it's a lot longer than a lot of my other videos, and my videos are already pretty long. So again, I really do appreciate everybody sticking around. I have so many more thoughts about Crystalized, and again, this took me so long to make because I just kind of was at a loss as where to start. It was almost overwhelming to me, the amount of stuff that I needed to talk about with Crystalized, that for the most part for the other seasons, I put out a review like days after they aired because I was like, oh cool, love that, this is great. Maybe didn't like some of this stuff, but for the most part it was good. This is really cool, excited to see what comes next. With this season, I was simply at a loss. It was like there was a void where I just sat down and I just did not know what to make of it whatsoever. I was very confused and baffled, honestly, at many of the decisions made with character arcs. I haven't even talked about Wu's character arc in this season, of which there wasn't really any. Haven't talked about Misako, or the fact that Misako never interacts with Garmadon. I haven't really talked about Garmadon's character arc, although I did like that one for the most part, although unfortunately it doesn't reference the excellent comics, which really understand Garmadon as a character. Would recommend you check out the comics. It shows kind of his internal struggle between who he is he an evil warlord, is he pure bad, does he do bad things but for good reasons? He's figuring out who he is in those comics. That was a really cool way to address his character. And then he just kind of is back to right after March of the Oni for this season, but I guess they didn't have the comics finished by the time the season was written, I don't know. But Garmadon for the most part was okay, but there's so much more that I did not talk about. So if you still want to hear me talk more about Crystalized, and I realize it has been literally hours, do let me know in the comments below what stuff I missed. If there's enough stuff, maybe I'll make a sequel video to this or a follow-up to it, or I'll just address it in the comments itself. I certainly have a lot more ideas on what could have been done for the individual character arcs over my big rewrites that I didn't want to spend too much time just kind of talking through my own headcanons and what I think should have happened. I wanted to talk more about what did happen and why I was disappointed with a lot of the stuff. And don't get me wrong, I like Ninjago, and I overall thought Crystalized was okay. It was fun. There was good action. It was a season of Ninjago, and those are usually good. And it certainly makes me excited for what's to come because it's a new creative team and it is ideally new characters and hopefully a new timeline, so thank goodness we're actually seeing some change happen here. If I see that Lloyd ended up with Harumi in the end, I may throw something, but it sounds that that was not the intent because obviously the intent behind this all the writing sessions here was to make it such that you decide your own endings and make the ending open-ended. Again, they're running a contest on LEGO Ideas where it's like you decide what happened at the end of Ninjago. So, I guess that's it. I guess you decide the end of this story, you decide the end of how Ninjago goes. I don't know how I feel about that, but it's what the writers wanted to do, and that is one of the biggest issues with the season. So, two big issues, too many things left up for viewer interpretation, and the other big issue was just wasted potential. As Sensei Wu said, in the first episode of Season 11, titled Wasted True Potential, I genuinely believe that this season of Ninjago has been the most wasted true potential the show has ever been. And that is so sad for me to say, because I was ready to love Crystalized. After the first few episodes, I was ready for this to be the best Ninjago season ever. I got my friends to watch it. We set up watch parties. We had a lot of folks watching it. I was so excited. I was so involved. I was rewatching the early episodes over and over again. I think I watched Council of the Crystal King like 6 times. I was beyond excited. And then this happened, and it kind of just sucked away all the goodwill that they had built up, and sucked away a lot of the hype that I had for Crystalized, just like that. But those are just my thoughts, and again, this is going to be, I know, a very controversial video, so please do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I know a lot of people loved Crystalized. Oh my goodness, I didn't even talk about the choice of the ending song. Maybe that's for another video, I don't have it in me right now, but please let me know in the comments, what did you think of the season, what points of mine do you agree with, and most importantly, what did you disagree with? Because I know I have a lot of controversial opinions about this, and I would love to hear opposing opinions, and people saying, hey, I don't think you're right about this, and I think you're just wrong or stupid about what you're proposing, or maybe you just misunderstood a character arc. So I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and this has been the DuckBricks review of Ninjago Crystalized.
Alright, and with that, we have finally summarized my entire thoughts on Ninjago Crystalized as a whole, the entire season. Again, my apologies for taking so long to have this video come out. I really just had to sit and rewatch it for quite some time. I think I rewatched the entire season 3 times before making this review because there's just so much that I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss and make sure that I made a point on. And I hope that you enjoyed this in-depth look at my thoughts on Crystalized. And do you know what you would have done, or do you have any ideas as to what you would have done differently with the season? I am super curious now to hear from all of you. What did you think of Crystalized? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? Did you like most of it up until the ending like I did, or anything in between? I would love to hear your thoughts on how they handled what is basically the final season to this era of Ninjago, which is pretty monumental for a LEGO theme. It's pretty rare that LEGO themes that are original story themes, one, last this long. The only other original theme that has come remotely close has been Bionicle. That got a pretty good ending in my opinion, although they did leave a lot of threads hanging. For the most part, the main storyline got an ending that was also around a 10 to 11 year run. Ninjago was the only other theme that's lasted this long with a continuous story. And man, this was a controversial ending. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on how the finale went, how this final season went, and what are your suggestions on what could have been done to change it? And what do you think of my suggestions as well? I definitely don't think they're perfect. I am no TV writer. I am sure the writers absolutely knew what they were doing with this. I just think there were a few things that were a little bit questionable to me. And with that, we have summed up this review. Lastly, I do want to give a massive thank you to the LEGO Ninjago team for sticking with this and putting together one of the most interesting original LEGO stories that has come out of the past decade. This is Tommy Anderson's, aka the head creator and writer of Ninjago's, last season and year with the show. He has officially stepped down from having any sort of involvement in Ninjago completely, which is pretty monumental. A lot of the old voice actors have said their farewells as well, such as Kai's voice actors. So we're going into the future in 2023, and we really don't have any idea where this is going to go next at this time. So I am so excited to just jump into that next year. And do let me know in the comments, are you excited? Are you anxious? Are you worried? I want to hear all of it. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye for now.